You're watching BCTV. We're all about Branford. You're watching BCTV, Branford Government Television, a service of Branford Community Television. This program is brought to you in part through the support of the town of Branford.
Okay, we'll call this meeting of the Branford Planning and Zoning Commission to order. It is Thursday, November 6, 2025, and I have about 7:01 p.m. We'll introduce members of the commission and staff. Commission member Joe Chadwick. Joe, are you here?
Joe Chadwick is present.
Thank you, Joe. Commission member Fred Russo. Fred, are you here?
Fred Russo is here.
Thank you, Fred. Joe Viuzzo. Joe, are you here?
Joe Viuzzo here.
Thank you, Joe. Marcy Pelusi. Marcy, you're here?
Marcy's here.
Thank you, Marcy. Sharon Hutner. Sharon, you here?
Sharon is here.
And I don't see Dave Dyer. Is he coming? Does anyone heard anything? Okay.
I'm not aware if he's planning to attend or not.
Okay. And our staff this evening is our town planner, McKeel Wackers. McKeel, you're here?
Yep. Here.
Our assistant planner, Dan Robinson. Dan, you're here?
Here.
And our clerk recording secretary lurking in the background is Michelle Martin. I am Chuck Anders, chair. And I'll ask Fred, do we have any legal notices of public hearing to read?
No, Chuck, there are no legal notices for this meeting.
Thank you, Fred.
Okay.
So I think what we're doing is we're continuing the public hearing on some zoning text amendments. So that we'll follow the normal format for our public hearing is that the applicant, which is actually, I know McKeel filed them on behalf of the Planning and Zoning Commission. We'll start off with the applicant presentation, have some questions, comments from commission members and staff, open up to the public, and we'll have further comments. McKeel or Dan, can you just review the process for us for participating in this remote public hearing?
Yep, I can do that. So if you choose to participate and you have a computer with a web camera, you can select raise your hand in the participant window. You will be called and you will be able to make please state your name and your address for the record. You do not need to present orally. You can submit questions in the chat. We will try to monitor the chat the best we can, but we do prefer that participants state their positions live via the webcam. You can just view, and you're not required to state your name in the window, in your webcam window. You can. But if you do choose to participate, you do need to disclose who you are and your address. All the instructions are on the agenda, and I'll paste them into the chat window so you can refer to them throughout the meeting. All right, Chair.
Okay, thank you, McKeel. So we're going to proceed with our public hearings for our text amendments. We actually have, I think it's 5 text amendments. And we've separated them into 2 public hearings. I think when we started last time, I think McKeel indicated this is more of a workshop-y type of presentation, and that's what it's been. And particularly, I think 2 of the amendments, one particularly the landscaping and the height one, there's been a lot of interesting questions and back and forth about those. There's some questions on some of the other ones too, but they're less so. But my expectation is that we may, and there's been a lot of public input, both from commission members and the public, that have been very valuable. It's been a very positive experience. But we're always debating the issue of we want to get something done. We want to make the improvements. We don't want to deliberate forever. There's some value in that. On the other hand, we want to do it right. We want to make sure we've heard everything. We want the product to be well crafted. and that's what we're debating in this one too. My expectation is that for the two ones that we're talking about, I don't think we're going to be in a position to vote because we're still in the process. I think we've heard a lot of good public input from both the public and also commission members about the actual text, and we may end up, particularly since it's the changes from we end up with changes from the original draft. So we may just start once we get another text, do it again, and again balancing that interest. So that I'm just doing that as an overview, giving my perspective. Obviously all the commission members will talk about this, figure out how we want to go forward on this, but just giving you my perspective on that. So with that, the first zoning text amendments, it's really three subject matters. And that's under public hearing one. That is the zoning height question. And again, that is an issue of, do you increase the height for buildings, mainly dwellings that are in the floodplain along the water? And how do we address that? That's an issue. And the issues are that under federal law, if you do new construction or substantial improvements to a dwelling, you have to increase the level of the habitable area, first floor habitable area, to above the base flood elevation. So that means you may, if you're doing substantial improvements, you have to elevate everything. And does that mean you should be able to get a higher limit of your house? Should you be able to raise that? And if so, how much? How do you address that? And the pros are, you had a house, I had a 2-story house, and now this law is requiring that I elevate it because for flood safety reasons, we got to have the first floor above the base flood elevation. So should I be able to, as of right, have a higher dwelling? And some say, sure, that's I'm putting all this money in. That's what I should be able to do that. There are other factors, particularly when you're dealing with heights of buildings near shoreline, you have views involved, and some people are very concerned about that. Hey, look, I bought my property over here with this expectation, and all of a sudden these big structures are going up, and so anyway, it's a debatable sort of issue. So that is the first regulation that we're looking at. The next one in this section that's one we may be able to act on. That's the 6.8, which is the excavation grading regulations, the exemptions. We have exemptions to those, but then there's exemptions to the exemptions that's saying, even if you come with an exemption, you still got to come before us. But now we're saying we're going to narrow an exemption to the exemption to the exemption. We haven't heard a whole lot of that one. But we can go into that. And then there was the minor site plan changes and having things done by staff as opposed to the commission themselves for minor. We've heard some comments on that, but anyway, those are covered by our first public hearing, and then the bigger one is the landscaping one in the second one. So with that lengthy introduction, let's go to our first public hearing, which involves the height and the other ones. McKeel, do you want to summarize and give us an overview of what you've done since we completed?
Thank you, Chair. McKeel Ackers, town planner. I'm going to go through and do a presentation. We had a busy meeting last 2 weeks ago, so I didn't do a presentation as we opened the public hearing, but I did want to start getting public input. A lot of these amendments have been around and circulated since early summer, but without a lot of engagement. So I'm really taking this opportunity for the public hearings to sort of workshop and make sure that what we are proposing can be crafted and also reflect the values of Branford. So to share my screen. So I'm going to go through a number of slides. It's 5 slides for the first set, the public hearing, but there are 4 different sort of amendments. The first really is this question about height. What height are we going to sort of permit when structures are located in the flood zone, and really to allow for properties to be raised and be adjusted so that they can, those property owners can improve their properties. Two, they either can maintain what they have or at least achieve safety as a result. And three, I just think we need to sort of clarify from a regulatory standpoint what is the appropriate way forward. Currently, there are a number of instances, and even in my short time here, or the 6 months I've been here, before Zoning Board of Appeals regularly takes up applications where the hardship is determined to be location in the floodplain, and they're required to make changes now as a result of that. So whenever you see something repetitively coming before Zoning Board of Appeals, seeking variances, that's an opportunity to sort of question, is there a legislative solution here, and should we consider that? So as we originally, what I had proposed was that the base flood elevation would become sort of the point from which you start measuring, and then you would just allow for the height within that zoning district, which is 35 feet in most areas of Branford, to extend from that base flood elevation. There's been a lot of questions on whether or not that's appropriate, and it's a good thing to sort of have a conversation about. And one of the changes as a result from since last week is really to sort of fix it less to a height, but more to a number of stories that are allowed. And here I'm proposing 2.5 stories. It could be 1.5, it could be 2 stories. I think we just still need to figure out what we think makes sense. And then as a result of adding stories as opposed to a strict number of feet, we put in a definition of what a story would be within the regulations as a result. And for this, a residential story would be floor-to-floor height of 12 feet. And commercial buildings would have and also multifamily, 5 or more residential units, would have a floor-to-floor height of 16 feet. And then we also define what a half story is, which is essentially any portion of the structure within the roof area with a floor area less than 50% of the story immediately below. At the request of the commission and chair, I did look at what other communities are doing with respect to this particular aspect of how you determine height in a floodplain. I did find 4 communities that currently have made adjustments. So they've pursued, at least three pursued a legislative remedy, and the 4th did actually tinker with the variance approach. So Guilford, they actually start measuring height at 4 feet below base flood elevation, and they cap that also at 40 feet above that threshold. So in many parts of Branford, base flood elevation is 12 or 13 feet. So you would subtract 4 from that, so that'd be around 8 feet or 4 feet from which you would start measuring height, and then you could go up to 40 feet beyond that. Milford, they have a max of 35 feet across many of the residential areas, but they've tinkered with their variance procedure, and they've outlined it specifically within their flood regulations. So they're actually saying that, we're going to grant variances, but we know this is not a hardship. Someone choosing to make improvements on their property is not technically a hardship. Floodplain is not unique to their property. Therefore, they've actually said, we'll grant variances that can further the purposes of flood regulations. So that sort of is an avenue where they say, as long as you make your property safe and more secure within the floodplain, then we'll grant you leeway, and included in that is leeway with height. Westport, they allow for an additional 5 feet above the existing district height limit if the property is located within a flood area, and that's assuming to be that recognition that people need to raise their property higher. And Greenwich does a similar approach as Guilford. They start measuring at 2 feet below base flood elevation. and then you're allowed to apply the district height limit within that district. So these are sort of four approaches, two of which are similar, Guilford and let me just
Recording in progress.
and Westport, Guilford and Greenwich, and then Westport is also rather than where you measure where you start, they determine where you can end at the top. So that is what I have for height, and I'll go through the other ones as well. But really, the questions I have for the commission is like, what approach do we want to pursue here? Do we say that there's a recognition that there's going to be growing pressures, and do we preserve properties and recognize that improvements, if made, will require properties to be elevated? Do we constrain what height looks like for the purposes that the chairman had discussed, view sheds, character, with a recognition that people might not be able to restore what they have? And then the third is, there might not be a legislative approach that we don't want to pursue, but the claim that a variance is the right path, I question, but it is an avenue that we currently sort of allowing in the town. All right, so the next amendment does pertain to 6.8 of the regulations, which deals with grading and how we regulate grading within the town of Branford. One of the reasons why I brought this up is twofold. One is that I've heard from many people that it just seemed like the regulation was, it seemed like we've tripped over the wording, and we're requiring a large number of special exceptions for things that really are just proximity to critical coastal resource and in wetland watercourses. Even when those particular regulations that govern those aspects don't come to bear, because the activity that's in question is typically exempt. So if you look at the chart, the survey I did of the zoning code in the spring when I first came on board, I took a look at all the special exceptions that had been reviewed by the commission over the past 6 years, and grading by far was on top. And it's mostly because of that fact is that we get tripped up over, if an activity is within 100 feet of a critical coastal resource or within 100 feet of an inland wetland watercourse, we're forcing people to get a special exception. Now, many of those did not require any significant review from those other regulatory aspects. I understand there's been some comment about, at least this gives us an extra way to review a particular project, but I don't know if we've added a lot of value in that review, and to the extent that it's almost, it's basically double even household dwelling development. It sort of seems to be out of kilter with what you would expect to see. I would think grading is our significant changes in how a property is graded. A lot of moving or excavation of soil, removing of soil. I just don't see that there's that much, not 84 applications worth of activity that is really rises to the level of significant special exception review. So what this amendment does is rather than try and sort of rewrite the whole section 6.8, only thing I tried to do is point to the fact that there are other exceptions located in the regulations we point to. 6.8 already points to critical coastal resources and already points to inland wetland and watercourses. So why not also point to the exceptions that those regulations contain? I don't know, haven't done a significant evaluation in terms of what would be, what would that number of 84 applications be reduced significantly, but I think it will at least be an incremental approach before we could tackle it more significantly if we find that there's still a persistent problem of, special exceptions that are really coming to us out of proximity as opposed to actual intensity. The next is, I'm present two of them that are together. That's the minor modification at the staff level, which is already codified in our regulations. But I felt like the regulations are fairly, they're not descriptive in terms of what staff are allowed to do. So I went through and reviewed all the staff minor modifications that have been approved over the last 6 years and basically created a list, which is the list you see here, of everything that staff from notice of decisions have declared, these are minor and therefore we're going to sign off on them in a staff level. And I just want to make sure that the commission in one sort of blesses that and sort of creates some parameters so that staff have clear guidelines with which to do these type of minor modifications, which is currently allowed under the regulations. So the first, I broke them down into 4 different categories, minor building and structural modifications. B is minor site layout and accessory modifications. C is landscaping and tree management, and then D is other. So under minor building and structural modifications, it's minor changes to building facades and architectural elements. A lot of these times, these are aspects where they presented a certain type of material, that material is not really available, or the builder or developer wants to propose another material that is significantly similar. Reorientation of the structure, I've had where the driveway layout had to be altered because of things maybe Public Works had done, or the placement of a septic field, and therefore they had to change the orientation of a large garage. So those are just what didn't materially change the application, but it was a minor modification. Reduction in size of a structure, so they no longer want to build it as large, but they're going to develop it. Swapping out light fixtures has been a common one that I've seen come to the commission, and mechanical equipment platforms. These are sort of accessory type of structures that support whatever development. Minor site layout typically deal with driveway configuration and parking layouts. Adjustments to ADA, walkways, ramps, and pedestrian connections. Relocation of dumpsters, largely because Public Works or whoever's doing trash hauling needs to locate them somewhere else so that there's be better flow and ability to access those aspects of the property. Modification of special outdoor areas, so playscapes, barbecue areas, etc. And then, as we see more of, there's been a lot of upgrading in parking lots and installing EV chargers. I just want to make sure that's clear. It's going to be pretty common that an EV charger is going to be more present in parking lots as we go on. And I find those upgrades really be minor and not really warrant a site plan review by the commission. Landscaping, a lot of times there's substitution of plant species. I think we'll talk about this in the landscaping amendment, but sometimes the nursery just doesn't have what was originally proposed. And then how do we handle that? It has been handled at the staff level in the past. So looking at whether or not that makes sense moving forward. Removal of non-native trees in a plan and replacing them with native trees, which I think is also in the intent of the landscaping regulations that we're going to be discussing later. The minor modifications, extension of time for temporary structures, so construction trailers and the like. Minor adjustments to shared driveways, so like easements. And then, increasing a conservation easement. Does that really require coming back to the Planning and Zoning Commission, or, that is viewed as a net benefit? Is that something that can be approved at staff level? So those are the minor modifications. Just want to reiterate, this list was not dreamed up by me. This was sort of me investigating prior notice of decisions for the last 6 years that staff have done. And this is what I came up with. The other, which is sort of similar, but is a significant departure from what's in the regulations, is sort of recognizing a new level of site plan review, which I call a minor site plan. Now, what I propose is a minor site plan review. If you have a project that's 5,000 square feet or less, and you're not required to have more than 10 spaces, then I'm recommending in this amendment that that be allowed to be reviewed by a staff level, similar with additions and with accessory structures. So staff wanted to know, like, how extreme was that? If 5,000 seems like a lot of square footage, and what would that mean in terms of what staff would review? So I took a look at the past 5 years. There have been 30 site plan reviews by the Planning and Zoning Commission. 14 of those reviews were basically changes of uses. They had a 0 increase in building square footage, and they had 0 requirement to provide new parking spaces. So that was whether or not that rises to the level of zoning commission level review. 4 reviews fell between 0 and 4,999 square feet increase, and had 0 to 9 parking spaces. And then 12 exceeded 5,000 and or required more than 10 parking spaces. So, and then if you look at all the streets where those were listed, you get a sense that a lot of these are sort of commercial in nature. You see West Main Street, East Main Street, East Industrial Road, Monowese, Main Street, and then which ones sort of would fall under the commission level review versus the staff level review. And then finally, I want to share, you're looking in the zoning code, we have a table of uses, and what was really brought up is, this minor level review doesn't really pertain to residential districts. Many of those are already done at a zoning permit level, or they're getting a special exception, such as an accessory dwelling unit, which would, even under this proposal, would still come before the Planning and Zoning Commission. So I've highlighted here everything that's a site plan review, and you're really looking at certain specific business districts and industrial districts. So the BC, the BR, the BL, the mixed use zone, the industrial zones, and then which ones actually were at site plan or level reviews. We're talking about, the smaller scale retail. We're talking about personnel service establishments, printing, family daycare, home daycare. We do get into things like bulk storage and commercial storage, but I would assume those would probably go over 5,000 square feet. We're talking about restaurants with table service and restaurants with fast food, but not without a drive-through. And many of those restaurants, I cannot imagine that they would have 10 or less spaces of parking required. They would probably all kick into a commission level review. And as you can see through the list there, it's as many of them, like home-based businesses, require commission level staff or commission level review. I think many of those, probably don't rise to the level of exceeding 5,000 square feet and requiring more than 10 parking spaces. Many of those that I've seen are truly home businesses, and even if they have employees, it's 1 or 2 employees, and then with very little in the way of client traffic requiring parking spaces over 10. So those are all the slides I have for the text amendments that I'm proposing to the commission. Again, tonight I want to take in more feedback. We got a lot of written comments, which is very helpful, and we're still working through those. The commission has seen some of them, and I'm curious what ideas or thoughts that have arisen from what I presented, but also from what the public have shared. So, Chair, I'll turn it back to you.
Chuck Andrews here. Thank you. Okay, so of these 3 items, again, the height issue and the 6.8 exception to the exception in the minor site plans. So any comments or questions from commission members before we open it up to the public? Joe, I know you had sent some written comments in on this. I don't know if you wanted to comment on those, or if other members of the commission had some comments.
I don't know if it's necessary to reiterate them, but yeah, let me just pull that screen up here. There were, granted, like a pet peeve or two, like the use of the term pre-existing, which I don't believe is a real word, but the entire bullet point on the average pre-development grade measured from the base of the building or structures, it just strikes me as being completely irrelevant to the what you're going to see in a finished building. The height should be measured from the proposed finished grades. The pre-development grades will be irrelevant at that point, and I don't see a benefit to indexing it to something which isn't there anymore, and not part of the sort of perception of the building and the final space. I'm also proposing we are specific about using a weighted average to make the calculation around the building. It's a little more precise. It's a little more math on somebody's part, but at least they know what it is they're calculating, and you look up the definition of weighted average and you will know how to calculate it. My biggest problem was the area of subject to floodplain regulations. We are giving them a lot of bonus height. In any other district, you're measuring from the grade to the highest portion of the building. The reality of that is you may have 2 feet, 3 feet of foundation before you get to your first floor level, and it's not the same thing as the dimension above the floodplain. In this proposal or this definition, we're measuring from the first floor height, which is you've got a little bonus there, and then you're doing the calculation based on story height. And I have just a huge problem on the story height. I mean, I've done a fair amount of work in hospitals, and if I can get a 12-foot floor-to-floor height, I would be so happy. 12 feet floor-to-floor height in a residential structure just seems like kind of like arbitrarily generous number. And by indexing it to a unit of stories, we are making constraints on a designer's ability to pack space into a volume. I'm thinking about, a lot of the old modern movement buildings that had concrete floors that were, 4 inches thick. You can put, much space in there, and you could have a variety of double height spaces, single height spaces, tight spaces. But what we're doing is legislating a degree of homogeneity that I think is fairly unuseful to an overall design aesthetic. That being said, the story height calculation, that little sketch that I sent with my remarks, you will by default get a 40-foot building from the floor height to the top of a peaked roof. I find that to be just, that plus the measuring off of the additional space, the additional sort of freeboard space. You're making very tall buildings, and you have the potential for just an extraordinary change in character. I mean, granted, we've got to just sort of, I don't say bite the bullet, we've got to accept the fact that there is going to be an evolving vocabulary on the shorefront based on the height. That's just a fact of nature and the fact of the times we live in. But the additional height is I think not quite necessary, and the additional height is a function of the story height calculation or the story height unit, and the where we're indexing the height from. If you're on dry land, you're measuring off the grade. If you're in a floodplain, you're measuring off the first floor rather than the mean high tide line. In fairness, it should be measuring off the mean high tide line. Not mean high tide, the floodplain elevation. Excuse me. So on that section, I guess that pretty much covered my collection of complaints.
Chuck Andrews Chair. Thank you, Joe. Joe, I'll give you just a little reaction. I really appreciated your the one of the essence of your comments was that this is a lot of extra height. You think,
Yeah,
based on yeah, and I think that's fair. That's a concern. I know that is, to me, I'm always weighing the possibility that there's a safety issue. You're requiring people when they do renovations to do this. So shouldn't they be able to do it versus why are we encouraging even higher buildings in an area where there is flooding? Shouldn't we keep it low? I mean, there's policy issues that are going on. But on the sort of preamble stuff that you had done, I understood McKell's regulation. He took the existing definition and he didn't propose that, and he just added an exception if you're in a floodplain, blah blah blah. And some of your comments were, well, the existing definition, insofar as it's measuring from the pre-development level, that's irrelevant. My understanding as to why that is in there is because there was some concern, and I've seen it, that people before even, it wouldn't necessarily be a floodplain, would actually put a lot of fill on their property in advance, and thereby elevating the ground level of the base elevation, just putting a whole lot of fill on it, and therefore sort of getting extra height that way by just putting fill on the property, filling the property. I know there's something going on in Guilford right now where the neighbors were complaining just about that. Oh, of course it's by the water. They put a lot of fill in, and now even though they didn't, they're within the limits because they put an extra 2 feet on, then they got this extra height and so forth. So the thought was, well, we'll measure the height from the pre-existing grade to prevent you from doing that. That was my understanding as to why something like that existed. But
in that case, we should measure everything from the pre-development grade, period.
That's it's from either from the lower of the either. If the pre-development is lower, that's the way it reads now.
Yeah.
That you measure it from the lower of whatever these two are, and that was my understanding as to why we did that. Maybe we should revisit it, but that was my understanding what the rationale was. But I get what you're also, the gist about is this just a lot of elevation otherwise from the other comment. So yeah. So appreciate that. Other comments, commission members have any particular comments that again on these elements? Marcy?
I may be repeating what Joe said, but the two things that I keyed in, I'm less concerned with the start and finish height and how many floors, and a little bit more concerned with if it's a narrow lot and you're allowed to go 35 feet, the narrow structure that you get because of the flood zone. And I really almost like the decision, or however we figure it out, to be a little bit more, a percentage of the width for the height not to exceed, so that the basic form of bulk of the structure is proportionate to the neighborhood, at whatever height it starts or ends at. So that's kind of what I'm not hearing or not inferring from the comments. But again, I'm also, reading Peter Henschel's note about it while Joe's talking, so I might have missed something. But that was a little bit more of my focus. And, I'm just curious why those towns came up with the -2 or -4, points of reference. And to me, it's a volume for the size of the lot relative to the height, which of course still needs to respond to the flood zone. But if it's a narrow lot, I think the height needs to be capped and controlled. And, I'm sorry, you may not get your second floor or your habitable attic space or whatever it might be, just because part of, I think, our charge is to address the consistent character and structure of the neighborhood, and I think the reg should be fluent about how that changes, um, how that may change with this regulation from what historically it was small. Like we had all these small cottages, and now that people come in to raise their houses, but they're not just raising their houses, they're, adding size, volume, because it's waterfront property and you're getting these big, massive structures. And so I'd like to see the regulation control the bulk aspect of it a little bit more precisely.
Chuck Engineer, thanks, Marcy. I'll give you some reaction to that. I think I get that with if you have a small lot in it and the building is so occupying a whole much of the lot, then an increase in height could be more significant to the surrounding neighborhood versus a wider lot or something like that. It could have a greater impact on the character of the neighborhood, and perhaps I get that. But on the other hand, I'm also asking myself, well, we deal with the narrowness of the lot through setbacks, through other things, not necessarily the height. And you have the right to go to the setbacks, and why wouldn't that? I'm asking this. Why wouldn't the setback regulations? There may be nonconformities, and they'd have to get variances. If you have a nonconforming building that encroaches in the setback, you need a variance to do anything, I think. But that's sort of one of the questions I had is that if you're concerned about the narrow lot situation, that presumably you either have a nonconforming building but in theory, some other, not necessarily the height, but the other parts of the regulations, typically the side yard or the rear setbacks or the front, but mainly the side yard setbacks are the ones that sort of would address that. But I don't know am I getting that? Is that?
Well, I mean, it's really just overall bulk too.
Right.
You're getting increased volume just because you have to lift up the structure, but many times because it's now very popular to be shorefront, you're getting these massive structures that block views of neighbors, and prohibit sightlines and all that. So you're kind of getting, the neighbor who, fictitious neighbor is getting diminished on two ends. The increase in the overall size, even if it's in with the size of the structure, in the size of the setbacks and the square, but also because of the height with the flood. So like I don't want to deny people the right to expand on their property, but I hear on the streets this repetitive, McMansions coming in and, people from New York and, all these huge houses coming in. And it's just, that's to me the friction of the local people who've grown up here and maybe come for summer cottages, seeing the change to these year long, bigger, more modern houses. And, I just think I don't know if we should be controlling that transition a little bit more specifically. I guess that's what I'm suggesting.
Yeah, no.
Go ahead. In support of Marcy. Remember a few years ago, someone came in for a site plan approval for a few two-family houses somewhere off of
Right.
West Main Street. When
Yes.
they built them, I think we were all agog at what monstrosities they were, but to the letter of the law, they fit the zoning envelope. And it's like, oh my God, what did we let go by here? And there was nothing we could have done about it because that was what the zoning envelope said for that district. And it was completely out of character with every house in the neighborhood.
We did amend the regs to.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, I think, I don't know if we regulate floor area ratio in residential zones. Do we, Nikhil?
We do.
Yeah. I mean, that's another way of addressing bulk, but for the McMansion issue, but I don't know, maybe we don't regulate enough. But no,
I think it's felt doubly because you're increasing because of the flood zone and there's the, desire to expand the footprint, and so you're kind of getting doubly impacted.
And to me, that highlights Joe's point. We don't want to give them, it's big, maybe we should, I mean, one alternative is leave it as is, and then you got to get a variance. I mean, that's the way. I mean, McKeel pointed out a lot of communities that have changed it, but there's a number that haven't. So that's all you're left with, I think, is if you go that way. But other thoughts or comments from commission members?
Chuck, Fred Russo. Fred
yes,
Russo.
Fred.
I'd like to give you actual live example. I live on a street that goes directly to the water. I don't own waterfront property, but I have views of the water. I bought my property in, I think, 1987, and at that time, our street was mostly cottages, small one-story, sometimes some two-story houses, and probably 60-70% of the people were summer residents, and they closed their places up for the winter and came back in the summertime. Here we are in 2025, and on a street of 33 houses, I think we've had 12 or 14 of them actually ripped to the ground and rebuilt. And they're all within the zoning regulations. But what's happened is the houses that are on the waterfront, those have been ripped down and built. And by comparison to most of the houses on the street, they look like skyscrapers. What they do is they block almost the view of the water. We do have a right of way to go to the water, but by the time they build to the proper building lines and landscaping, it sort of narrows that view. And so I don't know if there's any that we can do about it. I mean, I've had views blocked because a neighbor built their house 3 full stories, okay? And at the time, mine was already originally 3. Theirs was 1. Theirs came up to 3. And the views that I did have of Long Island Sound are now gone. I didn't challenge it. You know what? They're neighbors. I mean, we have a small street. You can't be angry at the people that live next door. They're entitled to do what they have to do, and they did it within the zoning regulations. So as I said, I don't have a complaint like that. But I'm just saying, but that happens, and so I think what we have to realize is this: that if someone has a piece of property, especially direct waterfront, they get a view and a value on their property that no one else on the street has. I have some views, but I don't have direct views of the water, and so it would not be, I think, unreasonable for them to maybe have to give up some height because they've got the location, okay? If we're gonna, and that's why I agree with Marcy and Joe, that, if you're gonna make exceptions to the rule because of flooding, that's the property they bought. And there should be regulations that go across the board, whether you live direct waterfront or you don't live direct waterfront. When it's all said and done, if you've got unbelievable views of the Thimble Islands and you have unbelievable views of Long Island Sound, yeah, you may have to give up a little bit of height. I don't know if that's going to really reduce the value of your property significantly, maybe, but you have something that very few people in the town of 30,000 people, maybe there's a few hundred that have that luxury. And so I don't think it would be unreasonable for them to say, hey, you know what, we're not going to give you the first story starting 13 feet up, because in the end, what you're going to have is a wall of mansions across the front, which doesn't make it look like a shoreline town anymore. It literally changes the nature of the thing. We had an old neighbor years and years ago, and he always would talk about I think the term is riparian rights, restricting someone's view of the sound. And I think that's happened. I don't know if that's ever, if it's even real, but I think it is. But I think that we have to be careful that we don't sort of give carte blanche to properties that already have a foot up on everybody else's property, which is the view. That's worth something, and no one's ever going to change that, okay? So whether the house is 3 stories or 2 stories, or it's going from a floodplain height or from the ground level height, they've got something that no one else has. They've got an unbelievable view. And I think by, kind of trying to accommodate it, and that's what it sounds like to me, what we're really doing is we're giving people who have a very special piece of property a foot up, making it even more special at the expense of those that don't have quite the same view or a partial view or no view at all. So I agree with Marcy. I agree with Joe. I think that I think what we're saying is how can we accommodate a property owner that lives on the waterfront? I'm not so sure we have to make special exceptions for that. When you buy a piece of property, you know what you got. If the regulations say you have to have a house that has to be elevated, that's just the nature of where you're going to live. But you're going to trade it off with having an unbelievable view. But you can't say, okay, because you're in a floodplain, you're still going to be able to build 40 feet high above that. That's not right. It's not right for the people that live in the neighborhood because it may increase the value of their property, direct waterfront, but it devalues the property of those that live behind who no longer have the same view and the same look of their neighborhood. So I would say we have to be a little bit more vigilant on allowing those properties. Now, listen, I'm happy to see anybody develop the property along the waterfront. I'm not anti-development or anti-waterfront property people. I'm just saying that there are other people that are affected by those things, and so and they have that advantage. You know, they're fortunate, whether it's because it's finances or family left in the property, but they're fortunate to have. They're in a very limited and exclusive group of people who have that direct view. And I think just giving them more than what they already have is not fair to people that will never have that same view. That's my feelings.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Fred.
It is a workaround to increase setbacks so there's view corridors between the structures, perhaps, if they're trying to go to a certain height, or if they're expanding the existing structure by more than 100% or 200% or something with the floor area. I mean, is there a way to kind of think about the math to at least try to keep some view sheds open to the water for the neighbors? Because I think that's really the issue.
Marcia, I think honestly, in some ways, and I understand it, I don't want to make this too simplistic, but I think it almost sounds like we're overthinking this, okay? We should have, like Joe said, the regulations that are uniform across the board. Properties on the waterfront, properties got to be raised. That's one of the disadvantages of it, but the offset of that is you got the advantage of the view. And so the real question is, should a property being developed on the waterfront have it both ways? Get increased height because of the issue of being in a floodplain? I don't know. I'm going to tell you that I'm in favor of one or the other. I'm just
But think of it this way.
to my mind.
Think of it this way, Fred. If a homeowner wants 4,000 square feet and they can do 2,000 per floor or even divided over 3 floors, and we eliminate the height, then there's still a big enough lot, then they're apt to propose a bigger footprint at that elevation, 3,000, 3,500 on the first floor, which is going to block views from the street. So I don't know what the right balance is other than, can the regulations cap bulk sizing, or are we relying on the setbacks in the zone and the height to cap bulk sizing, or the floor area to do that? And are those numbers the way they stand now and good for 95% of the lot, so there's not a gazillion variances to be had?
I wish I had that answer. I don't.
Well, it'll require some research, unfortunately for Miguel, if he tries to answer it. But you understand the logic, right?
Yes, I do.
Thank you, guys. Other comments from commission members again before we open up to the public?
Yeah, Sharon Huntner here. I just keep on remembering what Mikhail said when he first came to town. And he said that whenever he asked residents what they wanted, they said that they wanted Branford to stay looking like Branford. And I really respect Joe Chadwick's expertise, and of his interpretation of these new regulations is that it's going to cause buildings to be even higher than they were before. Then I would not want that to happen, because I would also like Branford to stay looking like Branford. And I also find Marcy's discussion really appropriate in terms of the mass of the building and what that looks like within the neighborhood, and that how that maintains the integrity of the neighborhood. The other piece is coastal resiliency. What will taller, bigger buildings do to our coastal resiliency, and will that demand more from our services, our emergency services? So I think that we need to think about this one and see if we can come up with a better solution.
Check in to share. Thank you, Sharon. Anyone else? Joe Viuzzo, any thoughts before we open to the public?
Yeah, I have some thoughts. I think, what are we talking, 35 feet right now, the regulation is?
Yes.
30, yeah.
I think, right.
Well, when it comes to property that's on the water, and you got to get to the mean high water mark, that's where I think you should start measuring, not where the floor level is. I think you got to get as low right to that height, and 35 feet is quite a bit. It's basically it's 10 feet per story. I know you're saying 12 and 16 and all that, but in residential you could easily go 10 feet per story. So you could have a 3.5 story house on 35 feet. And I agree with Fred, his thinking on having something that tall right on the water and blocking view a little bit more so than. So I don't know what's the right answer here, but I definitely you need to start the measuring as low as you can go, and that I think is the high water mark, and then go from there. But I think we'd be at least on water, at least height wise on view and whatever and waterfront property. I think we should limit it as much as we can within reason. Because I've seen some of these places like Lanford's Cove and those places. You look like some of these houses they're small little properties, narrow properties. It looks like dominoes standing on edge. Some of these houses, they're so thin you think they're going to fall over. They're tall and they're thin, and they look even taller because they are thin. Narrow properties, narrow buildings. So I think we have to have some kind of a reasonable, come up with some kind of a reasonable measurement of height, especially on property that's directly on the coastline. So that's my view right now.
Chuck in to share. Thanks, Joe. Okay, why don't we get some public input? There's 3 different commission regulations here. The main one we're hearing most about is the height, but you can also comment on the 6.8 one and the minor modifications. So, Peter, I'm anxious to hear what you had some very interesting written comments linking this to the building code for stuff. So, why don't we hear from Peter Henschel?
Right. Thank you, Chairman Andrus. Peter Henschel, Thimble Island Road in Branford. I had submitted, and I think you all have, a possible way of wording the height exceptions for properties within the coastal floodplain zones. And I'm not going to go through what I wrote up, but I do want to make just a couple of points that I think are built into that's sort of that way of looking at things. And I certainly understand that the challenge between balancing the need for resilience along the coastline, and as chair of the coastal working group, I'm looking very carefully at ways of increasing resilience with our coastal structures, that against the general feeling that I think you've expressed and my neighbors expressed, that they don't want to see buildings all of a sudden start to be raised and get a lot higher and views be blocked and massing change and character change. So, it's a matter of trying to find a balance between those two different ways or different results of this dilemma. So just a couple of points I wanted to make about if we are going to write exceptions to the height limits for structures within the coastal zones. Some points that I think we ought to remember. Number one, we should keep in mind and reference in the regulation the actual flood management ordinance, chapter 161, because the requirements there may change over time. Not only the the base floor elevation requirements, but there could be other changes to that ordinance. So I think that it ought to be referenced in the regulation. I also think that in looking at height exceptions, we should be differentiating between residential zones and commercial zones. And my comments were just apropos of the 35-foot residential zone height limit, current height limit. I think we should also differentiate between existing homes that need to be raised to meet flood requirements and newly designed homes, because the need to raise an existing home is a different set of challenges than designing a new home where you can work toward the benefit of keeping things configured in the best possible way. I think in terms of existing homes to be raised, we should allow those existing homes to be raised to the required minimum elevation if no configuration changes are made to the structure. So if it's merely a matter of getting the first floor up above the base floor elevation +1, and there's not going to be any changes to the way the house looks or is shaped, size, shape, etc., then I would propose that a regulation should allow that to happen, but only to the minimum elevation required. So it couldn't be raised higher than the minimums required by the ordinance. For new homes, it's a different matter, and new homes or expanded existing homes, I think the ordinance also ought to be differentiating between flat roof structures and pitched roof structures, because obviously there's an impact and a massing difference, and if we just set a height limit that applies to both, a flat roof structure built to that same height is going to be much more imposing than a pitched roof structure where the peak meets that same height restriction. So there ought to be a differentiation in the regulation between flat roofed and pitched roof structures. So for pitched roof structures, they could have a lower minimum eave height, but a higher peak height, and meet the same impact, the sort of visual impact as a flat roof structure. In the regulation that I had written up, the wording that I had written up, in coastal flood zones, new flat roof homes can be built actually within the current 35-foot height restriction from grade, even with an 11-foot floor-to-ceiling height for a two-story building. And if you add that up, you could get two floor-to-floors of 12.5 feet up to the flat roof itself, and you could, for the very lowest of sites that would be anticipated along the coastline, which might be at elevation around 5, you could get it to the base flood elevation +1 foot by adding essentially another 9 feet. And by the way, the elevation requirement is to the bottom of the structure, not to the floor elevation itself. So it's to the bottom of the first floor structure, depending on how the building's been built. And lastly, in coastal flood zones, new pitched roof structures could be limited to an eave height of 19 feet above the first floor level and an additional peak height of 10 feet, and still have an overall height of less than 39 feet from grade. And so in the case of new structures, they can be designed pretty closely to the current grade height limitation of 35 feet and meet the coastal regulations at the same time. So that basically was the gist of what I tried to build into the actual wording, and I'm sure it can be done in different ways, but it was just a way of structuring it that you might think about. That's it. Thanks.
Check and share. Thank you, Mr. Hensel. Those are interesting comments. The interesting distinction between new and existing, elevating existing, and doing something, a tear down essentially is probably going to be a new one. food for thought. Any other members of the public wish to comment on this first set of regulations?
I see a couple hands.
Okay.
Perry Maresca.
Let's hear from Perry.
I got that. Okay. Yeah. So one of the things for sure, I agree with exactly what you're saying, especially Peter, what you just detailed out. Oh, and I'm upside down, so I'm going to turn myself up. Hey, I only had one drink tonight. What's that all about? All right. So anyway, so in Hotchkiss Grove, a perfect example. We've got a house that was a cottage a million years ago, probably built in the 20s or whatever, right on Seaview Avenue, and they are raising the structure, and they're doing it because they need to get above the minimum requirement. Then we have another house that was also built probably in the 20s, and it's up about 3 or 4 houses. It's on 3rd and 4th Avenue at the V. Actually, whenever it was built, if we want to do the math, they knocked it down, got approval to knock it down right before the 75-year mark. So they did not have to go to the different commissions. It was a nice house, whatever. But now they are building a enormous structure that is going to wipe out any kind of view from any of the neighbors behind. And I don't disagree if if you've got waterfront and you want to build, you should be entitled to do that, and so on. But I believe with where the direction we're going now, there should be some concerns, especially many of the homes that people have lived in for a million years all along Branford are being bought up by people that are coming in from New York, Manhattan, Fairfield County, and they are, I can't blame them. Branford's a beautiful town, but they're taking these, and then they don't have any appreciation for the history or the beauty or the neighbors or neighborhood feel that was here. So I'm not saying we've got to put a halt on everything, but I think we need to at least make things so that we still have a little bit of Branford left in Branford. Thank you.
Thank you, Perry. Who's next, McKeel?
I don't see a hand raised again. I thought there was a second one, but
Okay.
I think Joe Schiffer's raising his hand.
is he? I see clapping, but I guess he's trying to raise his hands. Okay.
I can't affect that GIF. I'm sorry about that. This is a very interesting conversation about the height. I'm on that particular issue, and the distinction between existing challenges and new seems to me very vital. It seems to me a very fundamental issue about this shoreline condition. So to the extent that it's existing, strikes me that the change in elevation in terms of the floodplain, the flood levels, is a kind of hardship, and it's a hardship that you would say, okay, I think it makes sense that it be addressed in some prudent way. But I don't understand at all why there's a movement to provide more height for new construction, those who are coming in new. If you're coming, if you're there new, and I mean new as you're, just purchase something, you're tearing it down, you're building something else, and why should the town facilitate that property having some special rights to, go higher than the normative, when whoever's buying it is buying with a full knowledge that here's the conditions, here's the situation. You build 35 feet, we measure it this way, that's the way it is. So I do not understand at all the pressure to make this change in those cases.
Thank you, Mr. Schiffer. Mikkel, do you see any other members of the public?
I see no other hands raised.
Okay. Okay, so the next question is, do we want to close this public hearing and then talk about it? Doesn't mean we have to act or anything, or do we want to keep it open? I think that my sense of the sentiment from various commission members is that we leave it as is because there's no, particularly for new structures. I mean, that was sort of the distinction both Peter and Mr. Schiffer and Perry, I think also that, and made the distinction between the new and existing, but at least for the new ones. And I thought some of the commission members said that as well, that prefer not doing anything. You sort of, you have the uniform, as Fred said, you have the uniform 35 feet height. If you can show a variance, then you got to give notice to your neighbors and you have a public hearing and, good luck. In ZBA does what it does, but that remedy is still out there, whatever you do, but not a lot of sentiment really to have an increase, particularly for new construction. And then the distinction, I think, that was between the new and existing, I could see, as I understood the argument from Peter and others, that why you make that distinction is because under our floodplain ordinance, you sort of are required if you make a certain improvements in your house and it hits like 50% of the value as over 10 years, then you have to raise it. And the issue would be if you're required to raise it and you're just keeping it as and lifting it up, and not making other changes, then that's to get your first floor at the habitable level, then that's something different. So anyway, I suppose you could say, yeah, you got to lift it up, but then you got to flatten your roof because, or either get a variance for maybe you get it, or you spend more money to take out part of your upper level, and so you even spending even more money. So I mean, those are that's in my mind the merit of that distinction. So anyway, but I think what we're talking about, if we go either of those directions, we're talking about a new reg because we haven't. I think we can talk about it further. And the question is, do you want to close the public hearing at this point? And then if we do it, we would probably, I don't know, we could talk about it. What do you think, guys? Should we close the public hearing and then talk about it, figure out where we go? We can close the public hearing for all three. Maybe I haven't heard a lot about the other two. We could actually maybe vote on the other two, the minor, amendments and the 6.8. But what do you think? Mikhail, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, from a staff perspective, I'm certainly closing the public hearing makes sense to me. We've had it open now for 2 meetings. I'm certainly not going to recommend voting on the height amendment. It's going to have to be rewritten, and I think we'll have to hold a new public hearing based on the new language if we develop new language. So, but yeah, to your point, certainly a 6.8. I'd like to hear where the commission is, if they're comfortable with what we're proposing, and then obviously the minor modifications and the minor site plan reviews where the commission stands on those. So.
Okay. So your recommendation is close the public hearing. I'm fine with that. Everyone else, other commission members, okay with closing the public hearing for these?
Fred Russo, I'm in favor of closing it.
Okay.
Joe, are you still in favor?
Thanks.
Mars is in favor.
Yeah. And Joe Chadwick, you're okay?
Yeah, I'm in favor. I just forgot to mention the editorial comments I had on minor site plan review of, just take those into account, please, because
no, we can talk about that. Yeah, I saw you had sent some suggested stuff too, and I had some too. I had some questions about that too.
I just wanted to comment though on Peter's insight on indexing some of the height to the eave height and considering that as I don't say legislatable marker. it's funny because I had just picked up a book from undergraduate school, Christopher Alexander's Pattern Language, and the entire sort of sense of space that you get and the organization of things like eaves and the relationship of those two buildings in space. I mean, it's real. I think that's something worth considering, especially given Marcy's comment about bulk and ways that we can regulate apparent bulk. That's anyway. I don't want to lose that thought. It came in quickly and left quickly, but I thought it was significant.
Thanks, Joe. I'm glad you'll make us all remember it. So appreciate you mentioning that. Okay, then. So let's close this item.
Chuck, 1 second. Sharon Hutner here.
Yes.
I just have one comment about the minor changes and having staff make those decisions. I'm for streamlining the process. I think it's a great idea to eliminate bureaucracy. But I'm a little bit concerned of unexpected consequences. So I said it at the last meeting, and I'm going to say it again. I think it might be better to do it as a pilot project and maybe have it expire after 6 months, or at least we evaluate it after 6 months and see how these decisions pan out and how the town and the residents feel about it, or a year, or anything that the commission thinks is reasonable. But I think I would like to see it tried first before we make it permanent. Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon. And we can talk about that. I know, Joe, I had some concerns, particularly about things in the downtown review in the village districts. We have 2 village districts, whether we should do it at all in those. I could things about that, but that's tweaking the language, I think, and that's something we can talk about. But anyway, and we can do that. It doesn't mean but I didn't hear much for the public comment on that one. So I think we're okay. We can continue to talk about it, but we can close the public hearing. So with that, then we'll close the public hearing for our first public hearing on those 3 amendments. And then we'll move on to the second one, and that's the landscaping regulations, section 6.3, where we had a lot of public comments on that one. So, McKeel, you want to bring us up to date what you've done since the last time?
Yep. Thank you. McKeel Wackers, Town Planner. I'm going to share my screen. I do have a number of slides to go through. Gotten a lot of great feedback. It's been very helpful. And I think there's still work to do. But I think I want to sort of let everyone know, since we had a busy meeting 2 weeks ago, this is sort of where my headspace is in terms of how I approach this. And I have some questions on how we can sort of move forward. But really quickly, back in the spring, one of the first things I started hearing from various people in the public that there was this landscaping amendment that had been sort of worked on for the last 2 years. And I was asked if I could take a look at it and see what I could do with it. I did take a look at the previous proposed language that had been sort of worked through. And in conversations with people who participated in that process, I sort of came away with understanding sort of 4 broad conclusions or goals that were trying to be articulated in the regulations. And they were trying to control the extent of clearance, trying to establish what the replacement of removed vegetation and trees would be, trying to require and encourage native species, and trying to require the removal and discourage the use of invasive species. And then I sort of bring my take on what we should be doing with the regulations, and I've got a couple of principles. I should probably write the correct word principles in there. It needs to be clear for what's required. Someone should be able to read through the regulations and quickly understand, okay, this is how it's going to apply to my project. Those requirements should be measurable. I need to do X number of trees. I need to do so much square footage of landscaping. it should, you should need to sort of steer a little bit away from the aspirational language. And I'll have a question at the end, sort of with how I would like to incorporate that. And then finally, the compliance with the requirements should be straightforward and simple. And then with that, I sort of put both of those and dumped it into the sort of the new structure for landscaping. And I'm going to have a table in a minute to sort of go through each of these. But also, I think it's pretty clear that the POCD that you adopted in 2019 clearly sort of, especially with regards to trees, there needs to be work done in this space. So this is certainly, it's been attempted the past 2 years, and I think there's a lot of progress been made. I think we just sort of need to fine tune what it is that we're going to be doing and what are the principles that we are going to hold ourselves to through this process. So I sort of intentionally tried to follow the existing framework that's in the regulations, so you can sort of compare apples to apples. What was old, what is new. But in reading the existing language that's in the zoning code, and this is not the language that was proposed or worked on over the last 2 years, I sort of put in each section sort of what was required or what language existed. So there was a purpose statement that talked about, enhancing property values and improving the quality of the environment. But everyone I talked to felt like that statement wasn't robust enough, at least for intent of what we're doing. So that had been changed and really focusing on the ecological integrity of natural systems. What does the landscaping apply to? Right now the regulations say all site plan approvals and all special exceptions are required to adhere to the 6.3 requirements. Now, what are in those requirements? We do have a section on existing vegetation, but there's very little that's required. You're supposed to highlight trees that are significant, but they're not required to do anything with them. It just is, now we know what we're going to lose, is essentially what that section states. If you go to 6.3D and you actually read through the regulation, what is it actually required to be done? There's nothing in there that actually requires, it doesn't set the measurable what's supposed to be done. It's fairly loose language, and therefore there's nothing there to hang your hat on and guide development. So in all three of these, I sort of articulated what it is why do we want to call out existing vegetation? Because we're trying to preserve what's important to the extent possible. And for me, what that means on a project site is like what is disturbed, and sort of looked at, can we use limits of disturbance to really control how that occurs? So I put together sort of buffer areas where the project and what's cleared should relate to what the project scope is to incorporate. So if you're building new structure, it's not just where you'll clear where the foundation is, plus the radius around it. There's obviously a driveway and similar impervious infrastructure that's supposed to facilitate vehicles. You can clear there plus 10 feet from the edge of the infrastructure. You're probably going to serve the property with sanitary and storm sewers. You'll provide a buffer area that you can clear around 20 feet of that. Similar private stormwater and similar infrastructure, you can clear around not just where that's going to go, but 10 feet around that. And then other necessary improvements for a site, which could include regrading of the site. And then you can do 10 feet around that. It's really just try and hone in what the scope of the project is, and really say, okay, if you're building here and you need to put your stormwater infrastructure here, then you can clear that space plus the buffer around it. But you shouldn't be clearing lot line to lot line just because the regulations don't prevent that. The landscaping requirements, adjusted it to 75%. The native species, it was 100%. The STAR set a a measure by which we have to, what you need to replace based on the clearing. So if you're clearing an acre of land, you're going to be doing one for one replacement up to 30 canopy trees that would need to go back onto the property somehow. The business districts and residential special exceptions will have other landscaping requirements. One canopy tree for every 50 feet of street frontage. Residential special exception, one canopy tree per lot. Then moving on to front yards. The old language talked about landscaping in the front yard, talked about landscaping strip, and one canopy for every 50 feet. I relocated where that would go. Side yard landscaping requirements. Again, a landscaping strip 5 feet wide. I don't see that 5 foot wide landscaping strip is happening along the entire length of the side yard. So I'm not sure if it's the most feasible regulation, or it hasn't been applied to projects in a way that I think the regulations stipulates. We have planting bed requirements. In business districts, 25% of the building perimeter, doesn't say where. It could be in the rear of the property that's not public. And 40% for residential districts. Again, it could be the landscaping on the rear of the property, not the public aspects. There is a residential district greenbelt buffer. I did take this out, and I'll show you why on the next slide, because it's referenced frequently elsewhere in the regulations. Our stormwater infrastructure talks about appropriate plantings related to that would work well with stormwater infrastructure. And then parking area requirements, 1 tree per 10 spaces and 150 square feet. We've worked on a little bit of language, but I don't think we've really worked through in the new version what that really should look like yet. Modification for landscaping requirements. We had this excellence in landscaping aspect that we could sort of waive away all other requirements. I did away with that and put in a fee in lieu of instead. If they really don't want to abide by the landscaping requirements, then they can pay the town or find other areas of natural habitat that can be preserved. And then finally, keeping the 2-year survival requirement for all landscaping plans and that are introduced. Moving back, I took out the front yard, side yard, and the planting bed requirements. I replaced them with list of native species, Connecticut Coastal Planting Guide, and then also list of invasive species, which is the Connecticut Invasive Plant List. Next slide basically talks about the buffering and the screening. There's a lot of areas elsewhere in the regulations. I didn't want to go rewrite the entire regulations, so I thought we've addressed it in many ways in other regulations, either through setbacks, screening, and buffers in certain regulations. And while I'm certainly open to putting it back in some function, I do feel like there's a lot of it's talked about significantly in other parts of the regulations. And that is the summary of what I have for landscaping regulations. The goal really right now, I think, is we're sort of in this, it's very much of a workshop collection of input and help to refine and try and develop regulations that I think the commission has been desiring for the last 2 years. But we want to make sure that whatever is done is hopefully clear and measurable so that can be easily implemented. All right, Chair, I turn it back to you.
Chair, thank you, Nikhil. Okay, well let's start again with commission members. Marcy, I know you did submit a series of proposed, also addressing the sections of the regulations that seem very detailed. I don't know if you want to go first or if you want.
I could be a while if I do, because I kind of went through a bunch of section by section. One of the things that I didn't submit that maybe I'll start with, because I think I'll try to sort of summarize what I think is most important. The purpose with the ecological benefit to connect biodiversity, the connection of the canopy, and using natives for as a food source for the pollination and all that. That's all very important. But I reason I tend to push back on this 100% native notion is because of the history of what's happened to garden centers and really understanding what's available for purchase, how it's maintained, what the demand is, for commercial applications. And so in my mind, I really started to come up with a distinction between, really using natives to protect areas that are already in conservation, and those edges, and minimizing grading in those edges as much as possible, whether it be through walls or even the 2-to-1 slope if it's not significant, which is part of another regulation. And then really just trying to identify where we can increase corridors of connection, which is why in the parking regulation to, have, you know, I think it's more effective to have 10-foot wide strips than islands every 15 feet, like if we had to choose. And, so I kind of went through section by section. I won't go through anything, but, that's really at the heart. And if you look at, one of the things I think people don't understand about plants is, the nurseries are really breeding cultivars, and I started to do definitions. Cultivar being a variety of plant that has been selected or bred by humans for specific traits such as flower color, size, growth, or pest resistance. You know, they could be both from natives and non-natives, but this is really at the heart of nurseries and sales and demands for, vibrant blooms, low maintenance, a certain size for, and 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 that's really how the nurseries are functioning. Granted, we're getting more response with natives, which is great. Natives being plants that occur naturally in the region prior to European settlement, adapted to local climate, soils, and ecological systems. We're getting more and more availability of those. But where it all kind of blurs, well, I won't define non-native. Like you've got hybrids, which are plants resulting from crossbreeding between two different species or genera to combine desirable traits such as vigor, bloom, and disease resistance. You could create a hybrid of a native with the non-native, and is that where do we include that on the spectrum, right? As we're calculating percentages. And then you've got what's called nativars, which are a cultivated variety of native species selected for ornamental traits such as leaf color or compact form. And nativars, like one of the letters from a botanist, can start to diminish, depending on what it's bred with, diminish the ecological uptake for pollinators. So it's a complex thing that I think it's very hard to just say 100% natives. And in my mind, a lot of what I was going through the regulations, I'll try to bring a couple of the others up. Um, was really to start to create a planting hierarchy of location. But let me see if there's anything. So I went through and I listed all types of screening materials to expand upon that section, and and I think language that gives you options helps create, design variety and interest, and will, help maybe the non, the gardener or maybe the non-professional get closer to what the intent is. Like, in the parking regulations, I wrote language to really encourage, a continuous low ground cover level because you want to maintain visibility in parking lots. And in areas where you want to prevent off-site glare, you might want higher shrubs. But generally, for sight lines and corners and traffic movement and safety around pedestrians, low-level shrubs, aside from canopy trees. I'm not dismissing canopy trees in the parking lot, but aside from, the low-level shrubs is what's going to help create that corridor of continuity. And, but what I hear time and time again is when you've got trees that are excessively dropping leaf litter or fruit or, things that become a maintenance concern on cars or staining cars and adding, so there's a balance between, how that happens. Let me just see if there's any other salient points. Oh, stormwater. This is a real pet peeve of mine, and and sometimes these are projects I personally work on. Um, I play pickleball up at Vets Park, and they put in a wonderful rain garden, and I love what it can do for stormwater design coming off of the parking lots for filtrating and all that. But it bifurcates the parking lot from the playground. It's all natives, which it should be, but it's not maintained, and it looks like a mess, and it looks sloppy, and to me that rain garden, which there's another one at Foot Park to the side of the tennis courts. It's much, that rain garden is perfectly sited because it's, not blocking the vantage point of the plantings to the tennis courts or like this one is at Vets Park. So I just tried to add some language for stormwater to, you know, encourage rain gardens over retention ponds because I think that the big retention pond over at Chili Hill Road is just way too big, all riprap, doesn't help the environment. And and granted, this is subdivision type landscaping, but, it would be really nice to see, overland flow encouraged and low impact development encouraged with our stormwater design, which ties into the use of natives and rain gardens and things like that. And that whole project abuts water company property. That's a perfect place to have encouraged more natives and natural things that are, happening, in that ecology. So all I really did was just try to use ecology language, do some educating, break down, you know, really the same goals that I think we've all been talking about, and try to give some latitude for the nursery to plant something that's going to be sympathetic with the native plantings and work with it, not invasive, but sympathetic, and provide enough options and flexibility in the regulations that we're not, like with screening, just coming up with the same planting result time and time again, or the same front yard planting, or, it would be nice to have that same planting in the rear of the property, perhaps, So, I can't go through it all, but I mean, those are just a few of the things. And the other thing is just comes down to with, you know, depending on where the site starts with the size of the trees, requiring them to pick up, I think, trees 18 inches in caliper is important and higher, because some sites might have 50 to 100 large trees, and then I sort of, in one of my rewrites, proposed a more measured replacement based on size so that if it was 18 to 24, you replace one in kind, 24 to 32 over 33, three trees, so that there was a little bit more impact if you're taking down a bigger tree. So those are just sort of some of the ideas I started kicking around as I was going section through section with the regs. Hopefully I didn't talk too long.
Thank you. That was I appreciate the effort, and I did like the distinction you said. More natives if you're buffering against the land trust property versus if you're in a parking lot, in ornamental trees. Yeah, and I understood the distinction. Other comments from commission members before we open up to the public?
Chuck, just one question. Sorry, Sharon, do you want to go?
That's okay.
I forgot to add. So one of the questions I have for the commission is, as we're thinking about what it is that we are trying to articulate here, maybe trying to differentiate what would go into a regulation versus what we really need to start thinking about as landscaping guidelines, and whether or not a landscaping guideline would be sort of a companion document that could be either in the appendix of the regulations or something that gives a lot more freedom to sort of articulate our aspirations and sort of vision what developers could be doing.
Thanks, McKeel. That is, I understand I think one of the goals was to not make this too long. I mean, I think that your text was only a few pages, and that was sort of the goal. But if you could have an appendix or something to flesh it out, perhaps. And I think, like for village center, village stuff, we have their separate documents that you look at for some of the architectural things that aren't necessarily in the regs. So, but that's something to think about. Sharon, you had some comments.
Yeah, I did. I think the whole discussion that Marcy just had and her expertise about all the things that she looked at and how she revised everything is a rationale for having a landscape professional be required in the landscaping plans, because the landscaping professional knows how to look at that piece of property and knows what kind of plants should go where. And I think I can't say it any better than Marcy did. So I just think that what she said is pure rationale for having a landscape professional be required as part of the landscaping regs. I also didn't see, and I may be missing this, what is specified as a landscaping application. So I didn't see the specific documents that were needed to comprise the landscaping application. So that was one question that I had. And also, I didn't see description of trees in parking lots. So I was wondering, I would like to know, how that was going to be handled. And also, I really have a problem with having developers being able to pay their way out of the regulations. So I would rather not see that in the permanent regulations. I think these regulations are geared to protect our trees and our environment and the health of our residents. And I just can't imagine allowing a developer to buy their way out of that. So thank you.
Thanks, Sharon. I mean, some of those questions can be addressed, but are other comments from commission members before we open up to the public? Hearing none, then let's go ahead and open up to the public. Who's first, Nikhil?
I think I saw Peter Henschel's hand come up first.
Go at it, Peter.
Again, thank you, Commissioner Andrus. Peter Henschel, Thimble Island Road in Branford. I did submit. I did review the latest iteration of the proposed plan, and Shirley McCarthy and I have reviewed it and submitted a bunch of points, which I will go through in a second. But it just occurred to me, I got late today. I actually got Commissioner Paluzzi's documents and was impressed. First of all, just impressed by the degree of volume of thought that went into them. And it occurred to me, and I know that the initial intent, or one of the initial intents of a revision, was to make the regulations clear, simple, straightforward, comprehensible, etc. But listening to Marcy, it just reinforces to me the fact that landscaping in general there's a lot of subtleties to landscaping and doing it properly and making it work correctly. So it's a complex thing, and I think I would hope that we don't err on the side of simplifying this to the point of stripping out really important stuff. And my inclination is to veer on putting back in a little bit more of the detail and looking at the complex differentiation between various types of site challenges that you might have in general. But putting that aside for the moment, the things that I did note, and Shirley and I wrote down relative to the where the regulation stands is proposed today. I'm just going to list them out. One was again, the requirement, this has been mentioned, but the requirement for a landscape architect should still be considered. I think that's important, especially on larger, more complex projects. I think that an existing condition site plan should be required as the start point for any landscape plan, showing topography and areas of existing trees and shrubs, so that there's a documented understanding of the start point of a project, landscape project. There was an invasive species list, a definition included in the current version, but I didn't see any actual requirement for their removals, and that somehow needs to be stated what those requirements are somewhere in the regulation. Landscaping within the larger parking areas seems to have been addressed, but as Sharon mentioned, the requirements for trees now appears to have been omitted, and I don't know whether that's something that would be put in again later, but I think where we started from with requirements for trees in the landscaped islands in the parking lot is still absolutely needs to be part of the regulation. I've been struggling, as I mentioned earlier in the last public hearing, with the definition of limits of disturbance, section 63C1, where now it's being turned now into a restricting the zone versus just documenting how far the planner plans to do landscaping on a site plan. So I'm sort of coming to terms with maybe the fact that this would work, to have limits of disturbance be a restricted area. But if I read the definition, I'm a little bit unclear about one thing, where it looks like the definition is construction activities on the site that have made changes to the site, including grading, etc. But whether that includes areas that are not regraded but have the landscaping changed, either removed or added, I think needs to be cleared up. And on the one hand, it would be positive to allow landscaping to be beyond the limits of disturbance in areas. For instance, I could see a site plan where you had a building and a parking lot, and the parking lot came within, let's say, 15 or 20 feet of an adjacent well-developed commercial site, and you could only disturb the landscaping to within 10 feet, and then you're left with a strip, a 10-foot strip along the property line that can't be addressed is in a cohesive landscaping fashion. So somehow I think that issue needs to be both clarified and looked at carefully when you're starting to abut adjacent developments that have been well done. We need to define one-for-one replacement of trees, 63E5. It just states one-for-one, but again, what does that mean? There are a lot of ways of looking at one-for-one replacement of a 12-inch diameter tree. So we do definitely need some clearer definition of replacement terms. There doesn't seem to be any requirements, at least in this part of the regulation, for landscape screening or fencing around certain site features. That might be on site, mechanical equipment on grade, etc., that you might want to shield by the use of landscaping or other landscape features. Again, limiting landscaping requirements to just a front yard landscape strict still seems a little bit minimal to me as a requirement for landscaping around a building. And in business zones, currently, the current 6.3G, the side and rear property line landscaping requirements, I think, should remain as a current requirement at a minimum. What's been required in the older regulation. also, the proposed regulation doesn't seem to have any replacement requirements for development of, if you have a large wooded parcel that's going to be developed and by nature relatively clear cut for the, building, parking lot, etc. And that might include a number of significant trees that are large but still less than 12 inches in diameter that have to be removed. I think there should be built somewhere into the regulation a requirement for replacing a certain amount of that landscape material, plant material, tree material. Again, whether it's by replacing it on site or, as I mentioned before, through some sort of a in-kind replacement remotely, might be considered. And one minor detail, but protection of significant trees that are supposed to remain should be, during construction, should be required with some detail about what's involved there. But that's basically our, the comments about the current reg as written. But I would hope that more time would be spent on this. Maybe you could set aside a working group to go back outside of the meetings and work with Mikhail to talk about some of the finer details that Marcia has proposed, etc., and then come back with a revised draft. Thank you.
Chair Candace, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Henschel.
See you, Jen Broom.
Okay. Ms. Broom.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Broom. I'm here to represent the Branford Land Trust tonight. And I just have a very brief statement that the Branford Land Trust has discussed the proposed revisions to Section 6.3 of the landscape zoning regulations, and we wholeheartedly support revisions that increase protection and planting of native tree species and encourage planting of native species in general. That's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Broom. Anyone else? Who do we have next?
Yes, we have a Joseph Madraji. I suppose I had the name correct.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, it's pronounced Mizrahi. I'm Joseph Mizrahi. I live at 6 Lindsley Street. And I also, I am recently appointed to the Conservation Commission. I'm also a member of the Land Trust. And I also think this is an important document. I was really, I was intrigued by Commissioner Paluzzi's comments. Some of the ones that I think are interesting, I think like nurseries, for example, concerns about nurseries. I think ultimately nurseries will follow the money. And just like California sets its own regulations and car companies have to follow that, I think the more towns do this, the more those nurseries will adapt and provide that material. So I think that's an important consideration. I appreciate her distinction between cultivars and nativars, and I think that's where perhaps a landscaping guideline would be useful, but where perhaps species are preferred, and even a description of the cultivars that are reasonable or acceptable. Certainly a nativar or a cultivar is going to be better than an exotic species, no matter what limitations that cultivar has. I kind of also wanted to address something that I think a couple of the commissioners mentioned, this idea that it's more important if you're abutting on conservation land. And certainly, yes, if you want to increase the impact of conservation land, it would be great if the abutters also had native species. But I want to discourage people from thinking that somehow conservation land versus our own yards are very different. Because as we see insect and bird declines across this country, in large part, that's not because of conservation land. That's because of conversion of so much wild land to lawn and to exotic species. So we have to start encouraging people to plant natives, even though they don't abut. that's what's going to create those corridors. I think the concern of having a corridor in a parking lot, that may be a little bit of the, the perfect being the enemy of the good. A big parking lot is probably never going to be a corridor, but there's certainly a lot of commercial properties that have a lot of lawn in front of them, and that certainly has a lot of potential to be part of corridors. In terms of some of the things I noted as I was going through this landscaping ordinance, I wasn't sure why we are giving exception to single family dwellings. I understand on some level, okay, the flexibility or that is, passing something like this, but ultimately we want to think about how many single family dwellings and proposals for single family dwellings are passed every year in Branford. Even for instance, on Damascus Road, there are two side by side, each one of them clear cut, and really reduced the attractiveness of that street when those were two wooded lots before. So I'm not sure why we would give people with single, lots, especially when a lot could be three acres for a single large house, and then they can clear cut it to put in a large lawn. And so I think that's a mistake. I think they should not have an exception. I really appreciated Ms. Paluzzi's reference to tree size. There are some towns that will specify perhaps 12 as your baseline, but they will specify a tree that is 20 or 24 inches as being a heritage tree or a specimen tree, and that may require more looking at whether that tree can be saved, or, as she mentioned, do you need to put two trees for a tree of that significance? So I think that's something to consider. Another thing is that in the requirements to look at all the trees, there are some towns that will include that those trees really are limited to those that are healthy or alive. And if the person developing thinks they aren't, they may need an arborist report to confirm that that those trees don't have to be accounted for because they are not healthy or alive. I understand why we're also trying to be flexible with the 75% versus 100%. I personally like the 100% better. But my concern with that 75% is just simply how do you calculate it? You put in a tree, you put in a shrub. Is that 50-50 if one isn't native? A tree is much more biomass than a shrub or a ground cover. So I think the calculation is a problem, and I think that should be specified. How do we calculate that? Is it one shrub per one tree? What happens if they do all native shrubs, but all trees are exotic? So I think that's a bit of a problem there. And I would specify that. Another thing I thought would be helpful, this list of Connecticut invasive plants that are, prohibited. The means by which a plant gets on that list is in large part, economic, political, observations that it's become invasive. But Connecticut doesn't certainly have a monopoly on all the invasive plants. And I think it would be perhaps advisable to expand that list to say that they can't plant species that are on the invasive plant list for the Northeast. So New York's list and any New England state would have to be included, so just to expand that range, because if we haven't recognized it as invasive, but New York has, it's only a matter of time before we do recognize it as invasive in our own environment. I also noticed the fact that the parking area, the islands, didn't have trees anymore. That seemed to have omitted. And I also don't see that they have a size requirement, a minimum size requirement. These intermediate landscaped islands don't have a minimum size, so maybe that needs to be specified. I'm also a little bit concerned that the existing vegetation this is in 63L, the existing vegetation may be used to meet all or part of the requirements. Because to me that indicates, again, it doesn't reconcile easily with trees have to be replaced. If you're saying, well, all those trees I left over there, they're all native. So now the rest I can put in, the 25% I can put in exotic. So I'm not sure that those can be reconciled easily. And I don't know that I would leave that, or at least address how exactly are you going to quantify that with the 75% and the replacement 1 per 1. I think someone mentioned that they weren't comfortable with the fee in lieu. I am in agreement with that. I think a lot of people who develop properties, especially if you're omitting single family properties, which again I wouldn't, but if you are talking about large developments, those people have deep pockets, and I think a lot of them are just going to pay the fee to get rid of this, and I think that would be a problem. So I don't love that stipulation. If that is necessary for flexibility, I think that can be improved. I think it should be clarified where that money goes to so that it doesn't end up in Branford's general ledger, because then it really doesn't speak to the ordinance itself and what we're trying to achieve. So it may be that it is earmarked for land conservation, or it goes to the Conservation Commission, or something that furthers the goal of the ordinance itself. So those are some of the concerns I had, but I do think that it's a great step forward, and I applaud the commission for taking this up. Thank you.
Mr. Mojaji. Mikhail, who's next?
I have a person who identifies as Ivy.
Hi, can everybody hear me? I'm Ivy Kim. I'm a resident of Branford. I live on Damascus Road across from the houses where the lots were clear cut. And so I kind of agree with Joe about why we're limiting this to just big developments. But if it's a first step, that's great to limit it to big developments. I wrote a letter. I'm going to try to keep my comments brief. I'm formerly a chair of the Community Forest Commission, and I wanted to just make a point that it's not always easy to obtain native trees as replacements. Certain native trees transplant easily and others don't. So I really like the idea of these limits of disturbance, because it would preserve ecology that you may not be able to recreate by planting it as landscaping. And we all know that a mature tree takes decades to achieve, so a replacement is not ideal as a one-to-one substitution. I really like Marcy's idea of requiring sort of proportional restitution for trees that have to be removed. And my other point that I wanted to make was that I wonder whether the number of trees required along the street is sufficient. It's one thing if they're big trees like oak trees to have one every 50 feet. If they are something like a cherry tree that's not native, it's a very small tree, and it's not taking up very much space in that kind of critical zone where the vegetation buffers a lot of air pollution. A lot of my other points have been made, so I'm going to pass it on. But overall, I'm very, very pleased to see that this is being taken up. I can see it's not quite ready to be decided on, but I'm very pleased that we're going to limit clear cutting on developments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Heather
Mikhail?
Sweeney.
Hello, I'm Heather Sweeney, a resident on Palmer Road in Branford, and I am the chair of the Branford Conservation and Environment Commission, speaking on behalf of the commission. We thank the authors of the amendments and the Planning and Zoning Commission for all of the hard work to develop these amendments. Through the development of landscaping regulations, Branford has an opportunity to become a leader in the region, the state, and even the nation. Preserving and cultivating native plants will help reverse the trend of plummeting population sizes of birds and other fauna that ultimately depend on plants. Plants are the basis of our food webs. There might be a plant that's not going to escape and become an invasive, but it is taking up space that could be contributing to the ecosystem. Preserving canopies can reduce flooding, mitigate heat island effects, protect public health, and increase property values. So I am thrilled that we are developing these landscaping ordinances, these amendments. In reviewing the proposed amendments, the Conservation Commission did raise several questions, which I'd like to go through. Several of them have been brought up previously this evening, so I won't repeat those, hopefully. And some of them are minor, some of them are more conceptual. These are not in order regarding that, just as I'm going through the amendments. First is maybe more of a personal clarification. In the chart about the parking, about the limits of disturbance, I have a question about the maximum limit for parking and driveways being 10 feet from edge. I'm wondering what that's the edge of.
Yeah, essentially the edge of the improvement. So
Okay.
typically it would be maybe curb to curb or
Thank you.
Edge of asphalt to edge of asphalt.
Okay. And then this is implied, but it reads a little bit confusing to me. In section E, it says 75% of trees and plants shall be native. And I'm assuming that that's the newly planted, the replacement plants, but it might help to have that included for clarification, to not speak to like any of the trees already on the property. And then I'm curious if for the replacement plants and trees, if the applicant is required to specify the placement of those plants.
Yeah, we require landscaping plans and as a requirement of the submission, and other sections will call for it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And then, excuse me, one moment. I'll skip that for now, sorry. And then the commission, as other people here tonight said, we are uncomfortable with the in lieu of fee. And we're also curious, we're not understanding about the first part being to pay. We're curious why someone would choose to pay the amount of labor and cost, that it would be equal, why they wouldn't just go ahead and do the work. Could you help me understand why there's the fee option?
So, Chair, if I'm able to respond, yeah, the goal there is that we have a section currently that talks about modifying the requirements. The current section is a little bit problematic. And this was an attempt to try and create some structure that would be more defensible, I guess, for the commission in the regulations. A fee in lieu of is a fairly common approach in some cases. I don't want to say it might be the best appropriate in this case, but I wanted to put it out there for discussion.
Okay, thank you for including that. We would rather that not be included in the amendments, and the same goes for the dedication of land for conservation. And I have a suggestion that if this remains in the amendments, that is clarified, because the land could be nowhere equivalent to an area that was wooded and clear cut. It could be, it could be very poor land and not with any ecological value at all. So that's all of my questions and comments. I would also like to say that we applaud the efforts, that this is a great movement in the right direction, and thank you for working to steward the lands of Branford by guiding development in a more sustainable method.
Thank you, Ms. Sweeney. Mikhail, anyone else?
I see no other hands raised.
Okay. Okay.
I think Marcy has a comment.
Of course,
sure,
I do.
Marcy.
I just a few things I forgot that all of the comments reminded me of. I really think it's important to talk about drip lines for trees that are to remain, and be very specific on the measures of, if we're protecting a tree, staying with that is outside of the drip line and outside includes grading. Um, in answer to Heather's question about the need to do a fee in lieu, my thinking was purely, say you're taking, you have a lot, and you're taking down 4 30-inch or greater trees, and they're required to replace them with, you know, 12, and the lot doesn't support that from a size perspective, then I would suggest a fee in lieu. I wasn't suggesting that that be in replace of having to do landscaping on the site. And then to Joseph's comment about, extending conservation areas, oftentimes I just feel that oftentimes there's more space on the perimeter of sites because of setbacks that lend opportunities for the corridors than necessarily around foundations or yes, roads are a corridor, so street trees I think are very important, but also when you have overhead power lines, sometimes the sizes of lots prohibit your ability to put in a large tree, and maybe the reg needs to be proportionate to, if you're using smaller canopy trees because of power lines, that you have to increase the number of them or something. But, many times and on many properties, you just don't physically have the space to do as much as you might want to do. And rather than not promote some of these ecological objectives, that's where I think the fee and lieu is important. But I also think, whether we do them through guidelines or the level of specificity in the regs itself, you know, I think it's very important for Branford to make a statement about what the intent is to accomplish relative to development with the environment and trees and and educating people to understand the differences because I have conversations with people, they just have, they just don't understand the value. And, you know, I work in the middle, I work in trying to have people meet in the middle between getting the developers and the projects, but protecting the environment. And, and it's a push pull, which is why I had the whole conversation about, what's available. And I don't disagree that if we need to provide more natives that the nurseries won't comply, but I do think that maybe we should consider, you know, and it's obviously an administrative issue on how do you count percentage of 75% to 100 and all that. But, you know, in the plant list, we can require that, when we're specifying plants that we have lines that indicate, is it a native? Is it a nativar? Is it a cultivar? If it's a cultivar, is it a hybrid of two natives or a hybrid of a non-native, you know, and so forth, and whether there's a point system or, extra value given to canopy trees of a larger size versus contiguous ground cover. I don't know what that is, but I do think that, having a professional be requiring a professional to not just specify, a red twig dogwood because it's native and they like the winter color and the birds and so forth, but to have to know and look up that it's a cross between whatever and a hybrid or, because I mean, I just, to be honest, I was reading last night about coneflowers and I was reading about, how there's cultivars of a native coneflower and they might do cultivars increasing the variety of color of flowers and that could impact the value of food source for the pop. I see Joseph nodding. I love it. Can increase the value of the food source if it's purely native versus a hybrid of something else that's being bred for a little bit more color because it's in a foundation situation. So really, I'm just trying to marry, you know, and also, business owners, it costs them lots of money to hire landscapers to maintain the beds, mulch the beds, grow crown covers, weed them, whatever. And I know other business owners who would rather strip the site and have a very, and I certainly don't want to promote that, but I do want to be considerate of the fact that, depending on where we put certain items like a rain garden or, um, you know, certain types of shrubs, it may be harder to maintain a neat appearance necessary for the business application. So that's just a little bit more chatter.
Thanks, Marcy. Okay, so I think we've heard from the public. We have the question, should we close a public hearing? My sense is we probably should, and then decide what our next steps are. If you ask me right now what I would recommend, it would be this. It would be that there be a subcommittee of 3 and only 3 people: Marcy, McKeel, and Peter Henschel. Sometimes you get too many people, but if there's just 3, if you 3 came up with something that you 3 agreed on, I suspect that there would maybe some tweaks, but you'd be 90% there. That because I liked how you all looked at this analytically. You kind of looked at different perspectives. You saw things that I wouldn't necessarily have seen, and you weren't biased. I didn't think in one way. I think you have a perspective of both the business owners and nature and everything else. So I kind of, if you guys were willing, that's what I would suggest. And then I don't know how long it's more work for you guys, but that would, I don't want to just shove it down the road and say another committee or whatever, and I like just having it little, frankly, because I think that's more productive. But
I'm happy to do that, but I think whatever we revise, we need to have public input on. I think it needs a rewrite in public. So I don't know if that means closing the public hearing tonight with the intention of reopening it.
Yeah.
Before we vote, or
it would be to, first of all, I see Perry wants to talk, and we're gonna let him speak. But yeah, the goal would be you come up with something, and then we open up a public hearing on the new draft. That would be what it would be. So in any event, that's kind of just my thought from hearing this. But Mr. Maresca, we'd love to hear from you as well.
Okay, so I got a little nervous when you said you were going to close the public hearing, because I wanted to see a little bit more of what comments were and everything else, and then add my 2 cents. But I do know the fact that we will have it open again. That's great. But I do want to go on record on saying 2 years ago we were going through this, and the regulations that were being suggested were very stifling to business. And I want to commend McKeel and anybody else that worked on making these changes much more friendly for a business, where it made sense that we weren't going to have them go to the next town over because we have just more regulations and more of a problem. So I do think all the effort that has come about in the last 2 years are fantastic. And if we are going to do a little bit more tweaking, then we have a public meeting again, then that's great. I think we've made terrific headway. I did discuss this with the Economic Development Commission at yesterday's meeting. And they do know that the intent here is not to stifle business. And I think that you guys have definitely done a fantastic job. And again, I will praise McKeel without his head getting too big. He really did. He worked hard on this, and he knows that we have to appease a number of different people in a number of different ways, and did a really good job.
Appreciate that. So anyway, we still haven't closed the public hearing. Do you? I mean, so that would be my sense, is that we close a public hearing and we would, frankly, either withdraw or just do nothing on the application. Presumably, you guys would come up with a new reg, a new revision with actual text. And I don't know where it goes. Does it go the Marcy route of all fleshed out, or does that become just an appendix? Peter had some, good specificities, but I think that's why I said, if you guys agreed, I believe there'd be a good rationale for it. So anyway, that's just my thoughts. But let's go around and I'll poll other members of the commission, even though we haven't closed the public hearing. So theoretically, we may ask the public to speak again. But I will start with you, Marcy, since I'm putting you on the spot. I don't usually start with you, but I'm
usually second to Joe Chadwick. But I mean, and we may want Joe to review syntax because he's so good at that. But
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
no, but yeah, no, I definitely think that once I started penning to paper section by section, you know, and I'll defer to Mikael, but I do think I want to see an educational component, whether that's within the reg itself or not. But I do think there's a tendency for, if an engineer is working on it or something, they're going right to the reg. They're not necessarily reading the addendum. So I would like to see more detail in the reg itself. I see the addendum as, lists of definitions or lists of, um, what's a hybrid and what's not, or available places, or, more data rather than, like, I think the guiding intent and specifics can be written more succinctly, but I do think that the reg needs to be in the reg as, and I want to use some latitude because I'm on the commission, as like getting into the screening sections or the grading sections as it may relate to landscape, right? So, maybe the screening information is in a different part of the reg, but
sure. But are you willing to be on the three-person?
oh yeah, oh yeah, I'm in it now. I mean,
Okay, that's good. Yeah, I'd let you guys hash it out. Joe Chadwick, what are your thoughts?
My first thought in hearing all this was a recollection of back in the days when Yale had this thing called Project X, where they were redoing an awful lot of the way they did business. And there would be a policy, and then there would be procedures that supported the policy. And my first thought was, well, keep the regulation sparse and taut, and then have a procedure on how that gets enabled. But in further thinking about it, I'm really believing that an awful lot more of the how to achieve the intent that's in the regulation needs to be interspersed in the regulation. I'm thinking about the difference between, say, the IBC and the residential code. The IBC is pretty sparse, and you know what you got to do to get it done because you're a professional. But the residential code tends to be a little more, I don't say chatty, but they tend to take your hand and lead you through an awful lot of stuff to a degree that the major building code doesn't. And I think maybe we need that level of let's say hand holding, but direction within the this regulation. But at this point, I truly believe you need a fairly lean group of experts to just carry this thing through. I think at this point there's been so much work put on it that it should not be a very heavy lift. And I think this could end up being a significant document. As I said months ago when we first started talking about this, Branford's night sky protection is something that's been copied all over the country. And I think this is probably going to be one of those kind of landmark documents. And I think we should not rush it and give it the time it takes to make it work right.
Okay. But you're good with that. I just want to have those three and then come up and then we do the public hearing again. And yeah. Does that make sense? Okay. Fred, what do you think? Fred, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I heard a lot of very, very, very good suggestions, ideas, and proposals here tonight. And I will be the first one to claim that I don't know very much about landscaping. It's never been an interest to me, but I learned a lot tonight from what I heard from the public and from our own people on the commission and our staff. So I think it's a wonderful idea putting this group of people together who really have that expertise to hone it down, take all of these ideas and kind of package them up, and hopefully it will meet for the most part, the needs of the builders, the town, the conservationists. I think that's within our grasp to do. I'm glad you didn't ask me to be on that because I don't think I could contribute to it, quite honestly. In this particular case, I'd like to be an attentive listener. And I look forward to hearing what your panel of three come up with. I'm certain that they're going to come up with something that's substantial, that's going to be fair. And I think, Chuck, on your part, I think you've chosen the right people to do this. So I'm just going to wait and wait for that report to come out and see what they have to say. But I'm sure it's going to be something substantial that we can all agree upon. So I'm happy with what I heard tonight.
And I know we've had a lot of public input. I know there were two letters from our former planner, Harry Smith. I thought there were some good substantive comments that people are going to consider as well. So, Joe Viuzzo, thoughts?
Yeah, my thoughts are what you just mentioned, Chuck, is a great idea. You got three people there and that's what we need. Limit it down to three good experts, three people that are looking at all points of view, and that's a very good idea. And I totally agree. And like Fred was saying, I heard a lot of things tonight that I didn't even, not that I didn't give it thought, but it educated me quite well in some areas that I never really thought of that much. So you're spot on as far as I'm concerned with the three people. If they're willing to do that, I think this will proceed in a very, very good manner. So I'm in agreement with what you're saying. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Sharon. Where's Sharon?
Yes, I am heartily in agreement. I think it's the most efficient way to go about getting this done, and I think the people you chose are excellent, and I second the motion.
Great. Okay, and you notice a trick thing. We didn't close the public hearing, which means I can ask Peter Henschel. Since we didn't close the public hearing, we're still open, and I volunteered you. Are you good with this?
I am good with it. I must say a little bit reluctantly, but only in that my workload is pretty extreme for the town. But yeah, I'd love to do this. And I hope I can be of help.
Well, we really appreciate it, Peter. And, it was intentional. I thought you've made some very good comments, and we really appreciate your assistance you've done both last time and this time. And it wasn't random that I asked you. So
thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay. With that said, do you want to close the public hearing on this? I think we can. Okay. So we'll close the public hearing on this landscaping item. And then I think on this one, I think we've got direction. We've got a subcommittee. I think you may have to notice meetings, because if it's a subcommittee, but so what? You just notice it and meet when you three come together. And obviously you guys can reach out to whomever you want, but I just like the idea of keeping it kind of small and efficient. And you've all had some great ideas, and let's keep going. So other thoughts from commission members about this? It sounds like we have direction on that one. So then the public hearing is closed, and technically we can withdraw the application, or we can just do nothing. Because we're going to come back, but we can just let it sit for right now, and then we're not going to do any. McKeel, what do you recommend? McKeel, I didn't even ask you. Are you good with this? I didn't even. I'm sorry.
No, I think it's great to. I've been very pleased with the input that we've been getting in the past two meetings and the communications that have come in. I think it makes a lot of sense to now fine tune and task a smaller body to get this done, and we'll look to do that. I'll look to coordinate that and make sure that we can turn something around in a timely manner.
Okay. So let's see, we're going to bring it back again. What should we do with this one? Should we withdraw it?
Withdrawing it is clean, because we'll have to re-notice this anyways. It's going to be different format than what you see today.
Okay. Since you submitted it, I guess you can.
I'll withdraw it.
Okay. So that's it. So that is again, we're talking about the landscaping regulation for section 6.3, item 2. That one has been withdrawn again with the new group coming in, and we'll be back. So, okay. So that completes our public hearing item. Let's bring back though the first public hearing, which was the zoning text amendments from section 2.2, 6.8C, 9.6K, and 9.6L. I think with respect to the height one, we're not going to do anything with that one. I think that one is we've got to look at further. What I took out of that was a general sense from just hearing commission members talk and also from the public that we don't really want to give extra advantage to people on the shoreline just because they're on the shoreline. They should have the same rules. So and there's a concern that there was, the significant advantage that it was a lot of extra, so that there wasn't just a general sense to do that. The one exception I heard was making the distinction that Peter Henschel made between the existing structures and the new construction. The tear down and new construction should be able to live with whatever the 35 limit, design the thing so that you may end up a shorter house, but stay within the 35. But if you are, if you're required because you have an old house and you want to improve it and you don't want to do anything else, you just want to improve it, and then you're required by the flood ordinance to lift it up, then you should be able maybe to lift it up if you're not making other improvements, you're not doing a tear down and something like that. And then there are nuances about the flat roof versus other roofs and other things. So this is something I think we could look at further. And I don't know how we want to go. For me, it was pretty clear that the committee, I thought Peter made some good suggestions too about also linking it to the existing flood ordinance, which frankly, I haven't looked at. I mean, I know it's there, but I don't know what it says. And there were some other things in there. So I guess the discussion, I guess we could let's talk about that. What do you want to do with the height issue? How do we want to address this? Our options are to do nothing, which means that's the way it is now. Basically means if you want to do over 35 feet, you got to get a variance, which you may get because I think some have been granted in the past. Or do we want to look further on a possible text change with maybe, however we want to do it, the distinction between the existing and the new and others. So let's go around the room and see what we think. Joe Chadwick, what do you think?
I think to make it simple, if we maintain the height limit we have now over the average grade, either pre-development or post-development, the lesser of, or the storm high tide, and let that be the sort of water surrogate for grade, so that no matter where they put their first floor over that elevation, the top of the roof is not going to change. It's still going to be 35 feet over the high tide.
Okay. So with I don't know if that sounds like a minimal change, if any, in the regs, right?
Minimal, but it's a it clarifies it.
Okay. Okay. Do you see anything merit to the distinction between improvements of existing structures or just raising an existing structure versus a new construction? I mean,
In point of fact, if you raise an existing structure, I don't know very many existing structures that are sufficiently robust to comply with the, um, sort of the wind loading and everything else when you just pick them up. You're going to have to strip a lot of stuff, do a lot of reinforcing, and there's just the sheer capacity of most cottage buildings is not anything tremendous. So I think that would be self-regulating in terms of the building code.
Okay. So that may be a false distinction, somewhat, because it's effectively, I don't know.
If you have somebody who has a recently built house that has good shear resistance and a good sort of proportion, sort of blocky proportion that won't rack, yeah, I mean they should be entitled to pick their house up, and that's that. But I think if it's a sort of a your classic cottage style house that you see all over the shoreline that's built with boards as sheathing, you go to pick something like that up, and it would not conform to any of the contemporary building code for wind resistance and shear and all that stuff. So you're having to do enough work on it to make it the whole thing upgrade. So
maybe we shouldn't change the height. Shouldn't give them any higher than anyone else. I mean that's I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think if it's that old of a building, we really don't have a good survey of this. But I don't think a building that old would be that tall.
Okay.
They generally built them quite economically in terms of floor to floor height. They're generally way under structure. So floor to floor heights are modest. The roof pitches are, again, not crazy steep. So I think that would end up being just a self-limiting kind of condition.
Okay. Thanks, Joe. Fred, thoughts?
Well, I agree in principle with Joe said. I think that houses that are directly, for the most part, are in direct waterfront, the chances are slim they're going to just raise them. If they're direct waterfront and if there's going to be an improvement made in raising them, they're probably going to take it down and do it right without trying to take something and rework it in such a way that it might be more expensive. Keeping an existing structure, and from my own personal experience, I did a bunch of properties in my days when I was working. It's sometimes more expensive to maintain an old property to get it up to code than to tear it down and redo it. So I think that I'd be more inclined to stick with the old or the existing regulations that we have than try to reinvent a set of regulations that really kind of require kind of a different regulation for each and every house. In the end, I also agree that if there's an existing house that is forced to be raised, the chances are, and I'm I don't know every single property that it's been done along the shoreline, but the ones that have come in the commission have been generally rip them down and build them up brand new, so they're up to code. And with that being said, then it should follow the existing regulations, not give sort of special exceptions because they're in a floodplain or flood zone or whatever. So I would be inclined to keep the regulations pretty much like it is. If they need to be tweaked a little bit by a little bit more definition, I'm okay with that as well. But I don't know, throw out the baby with the bathwater and try to come up with a set of regulations that kind of, one fits one condition or one, type of condition because you're on the waterfront as opposed to one that isn't. I don't know. I think it makes it really complicated when a property owner or a builder comes in and says, "Hey, we have a piece of property that's in a flood zone. Here are the regulations. Either you do it, you don't." I don't think that's being negative to them. I just think it makes it fair and square for everybody in town to follow the same rules and regulations, because the houses that we're talking about are the ones that have the greatest value. And it almost looks like what you're doing is bending over backwards for people who have a lot more money than people who live on that same street with a lot less money. I think regulations should supersede whether it's on the waterfront or not on the waterfront. You know what? If you have to raise your house, you raise your house, but you still have to raise your house within the limits that everybody else has to follow. So that would be my feeling on it.
Joe Gaiuso?
Yeah, okay. I'm pretty much for leaving the regulations pretty much as it is. The only thing that caught my eye when someone said it, I don't remember who, about peak roof versus flat roof. I think a flat roof, I mean, somebody that's trying to get all they can out of it and take that peak roof out, and to put a flat roof, they gain 5-6 feet or something like that. And I think in that situation, that the height should be lowered or something like that. If it's a flat roof, it should be lowered down to 30 feet or 28 feet or 29 feet, something like that. Because they're going to gain 5-6 feet minimum of height if they go to a flat roof. I'm talking about new construction or something, just to try to gain more living space. And now you got a big building because you took that peak roof out, and now it's to me it's an overhyped building. It's not a traditional cottage or whatever evermore. And an existing building, if they're going to raise it, my opinion is, if they're not doing any changes and it gets to be a little bit over height because they got to meet a certain ground level height, I think that should be allowed, because and that's a very rare situation. Like Joe Chadwick said, most of these houses go up that high, they're not going to withstand the wind forces. So, but the most thing that stuck out with me is that flat roof versus peak roof situation. I would venture to say, if you're going flat roof, then you got to lower the height a little bit. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
Fred Russo, can I just add something to what Joe said? Having spent 45 years in the roofing business, if there was this is the minimum height or maximum height is 35 feet, and you put a building up 35 foot high with a flat roof, I think Marcy mentioned, it consumes more volume, in appearance. But the way a builder would overcome that is build a peaked roof and put shed dormers on it. So, you have a gable in the front, a gable in the back, and the whole, on each side, you got shed dormers, which are basically flat. They may not be dead level flat. They may be a 2-pitch on it or something like that to let water roll. And you still end up with basically a house with a flat roof. When you start to define, should it be a pitch roof or flat roof, you find yourself in the weeds, because if someone wants to maximize that gable part of your house, they're just going to put shed dormers. And if you made regulations saying that, something that you can't do that, they would just come back a year from now and say, hey, I want to put a dormer on. And there's nothing wrong. They're not changing the footprint. They're not changing anything. I think, if we start to get that specific about it, make the height, whatever the style is, we always have a right to take a look at it and say, neighborhood, neighbors, whatever, and you can tweak it at a meeting. But I don't think we need regulations that define peak roofs to gable roofs. Because there's just ways to get around it, and the easiest way to do it is just do it with dormers. So you have a gable in the front, you'll have a gable you have a peak in the front, a peak in the back, and everything between those two peaks is a flat roof. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Fred. Mercy?
I'm going to try to take a step back, because I think everybody's hitting on similar things and it's similarly in consensus. But the one correction, I'm not sure who I'm making it to, but I think the reality is, if you're going to spend $150,000 to raise a footprint, you're going to need some percentage to just get stairs up to it. There's some increase in footprint that has to happen for working within the existing space. So, I tend to think of, if you're not increasing the footprint by a certain amount, then I would be open to allowing non-habitable space for peaked roofs potentially above that 30, that height restriction. But, other than that, I really don't see a whole lot of flex and needing to change off of the existing space. But I think the reality is, if you're going to spend the money to lift the house, you're going to want to increase the floor area ratio, and you know and then I would like the restriction to hold the height down as much as possible. If they're working within the existing footprint to like a nominal increase for, access or something, then I would tend to feel a little bit more lenient to allowing the design to be a little bit more vertical, but not necessarily habitable above the maximum height. And again, you know, it's hard to say this if it's a narrow lot. No, I don't want a, 40-foot tall, narrow house, domino house, but generally on a case by case basis, that's where I would hold the middle ground, you know, because I think in evaluating these, we want to make sure that we're trying to maintain some view corridors on either side of the house, especially if they're going up and pushing the limits. And I know a lot of lots that, you know, are built out to the side yard and are maxing out that third floor peaked, dormered habitable space. And I just, that's what I have a little bit of a issue with. So.
Thanks, Lucy. Sharon?
I don't really have anything to add to the discussion, so I think what everybody has said is really adequate. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Sharon. Okay, McKeel, here's my sense is that we're probably going to withdraw this particular one as well, that we don't want, the general census is we don't particularly want to increase the height for shoreline. They should have to abide by the general height, which means that they could still apply for a variance and still get it. What I got a sense of is that we may want to tweak some things, and maybe we could look for more. The things that I'd be interested, and Branford's a weird town because we got Pine Orchard and Short Beach. We have their own zoning, which also have a lot of floodplain shoreline. I'd be curious, do they do anything different? I mean, I don't know if we check with them, but it's worth checking. And then maybe getting a better, I think you mentioned that the ZBA, there's a lot of, they consider floodplain to be a hardship. And maybe they do, but have they sought, I don't know if you distinguish, were there a lot of height variances versus other ones, other setback variances or whatever? I'm sure there's a lot of variances and whatever.
There's been one height variance I'm aware of. I think it went up to 37 feet. So
okay. So I mean, I suppose that's, you could say that's a remedy. And frankly, that's probably what a lot of towns do on the shoreline. They just leave it up to them. The other sort of information I'd be curious about is someone like a Jim Preddy who does these things. And I understand that the guy is speaking from a developer's point of view or whatever, but I'd be curious as to what he would say, because he's lived with that. So anyway, that's in the category of maybe looking further at it, but I don't think we're going to do anything with this right now.
No, that makes sense. And I get the same. This was an important discussion. I think we got a lot of good feedback. What I'm hearing is that it's complicated. There's a lot of factors that are coming into play. It's not as simple as saying flood issues trump all the other aspects that are coming into play. And with that, there are a couple other things that we are working on, which I think are naturally going to benefit from understanding this discussion. We are doing a coastal area management study. We've hired a consultant to sort of analyze and do some GIS work about the development pressures and the environmental constraints in our coastal management area, so we can have a better idea of how those regulations support and guide development as opposed to being a mandatory review. I'd rather have it guide something rather than just sort of be, okay, we got to send to the state, and that's the only purpose it serves. The other thing is that we are actively doing our form-based analysis for the town of Branford, taking a look at our built-out environment, looking at what the forms are, what are the natural sort of development patterns of Branford, and how can that lend itself to sort of informing sort of broader policy discussions that include bulk requirements, height, setbacks. A lot of Branford is non-conforming. We adopted regulations, made a lot of structures non-conforming. Under state law, we're supposed to try and avoid non-conformities. We should have regulations that sort of understand the built environment as it was, but also encourage where we want to go. And I think we have to sort of, we need to sort of, we're going to be presenting stuff to you over the next year where you'll start to understand how form and bulk requirements and how we as a body can sort of inform and regulate in a way that could sort of support these complicated discussions. You can't just boil it down to height.
No, thank you. That it is part of the bigger picture, and that makes sense. And I agree with you analytically that if there's a lot of variance being applied for, that suggests you should look at your regulations. And I know the one thing we did the last time we amended the regs, the comprehensive one, we did add that provision that if you have an undersized lot, you conform with the bulk standards of the zone that you do comply with. So basically, you could be in the 20,000. You don't have to have that. It's just when you have a 10,000, you comply with the 10,000. So, and that helps some. I think I've seen it help some, but I bet there's still other issues out there. So
yeah.
So I think the direction is for McKeel, you would withdraw the proposed amendment to section 2.2 for the height.
Yep, happy to do so.
Yeah. Okay, and then that brings the second one, which is 6.8C. I don't think we've heard the only comment I think I heard from that is the exclusion to the exclusion, of 6.8 of trying to minimize the 6.8 regs. That on the theory that if they're not regulated either by wetlands or if they're exempt from wetlands and coastal, then they can also be exempt from zoning. There's a state policy in the exemptions, embodied in the exemptions, both in this Coastal Area Management Act and in the Inland Wetlands Act, that they don't have to be reviewed by those bodies. So therefore, the theory is, we could exempt them as well. I think that was your thought, right? I think, is that
correct?
Right. And then the only comment I know in Harry Smith, one of his comments was that the last time we tried to do something, Deep had some objections, but we did send this to Deep this time, right? Did they say anything about this or?
No negative comments.
Not on this one.
No comments on this one. So,
correct.
So we have, check with Deep on this. Then I think then we may be able to act on this proposal if commission members are okay with that. Again, this is the amendment. It's in the paperwork. Can you call it up on the screen?
Yeah, I actually put it on a Word document to help if we were going to do a vote tonight. With a finding. So right now I have it as 3 sections. I can take off the 9.6 ones and we just do this as the adopted version, or we can do all 3 as sort of written. And if the commission has any tweaks in them that they want to see incorporated now before, if we want to vote on all 3.
Okay, I think there were some tweaks to the other ones that I think. So maybe we could. Does anyone have any tweaks to this one? If not, then we can move on then to the minor modification one. And I know Joe Chadwick, you had some I can tell you the things that I was thinking about for the minor modifications. The main one was, it wasn't, I don't think I had anything with 9.6K. It was the more the more radical, or the one, the departure, because is
Right.
the giving authority to staff to approve minor site plan revisions, which that's new. I mean, we've had changes, both minor site plan reviews, changes in the field. Though you've always had that authority, but this is actually new applications that come in. And I think that when I was looking at that first part, it said that you could do it and then you would notify the Stony Creek or the Town Center Revitalized Review Board, and I let me see. It was the town planner shall notify the Town Center Revitalization. Yeah, I think Harry had a tweak. Harry Smith had said you make sure you call it the right name. Or what, I forget it. Okay, it says you notify them after you've done it. That's kind of isn't that too late? I mean,
it's the language from the minor modifications, but I'm happy to change that. I think the Town Center Review Board and the Stony Creek Architectural Board should not be taken out of the process. The Village District is a specific state statute zone and district we've adopted. I don't think we can short circuit that necessarily.
Right. My thought, maybe just delete them altogether. In other words, if it's a minor modification and it's in a village district, it's still got to come before the commission. And you can approve other ones. And the thought, the rationale is those have to go before those review boards anyway, and those are advisory comments to the commission. And what if they recommend something? We can sometimes disregard their recommendations, but I wouldn't want you to be in a position to disregard their recommendations. And
Right.
it's just a little more complicated. And my sense is those are more aesthetical communities, that they're village districts. So even something small could have a, potential impact. So why don't you, I think it's better to leave those to come before the commission. And frankly, it protects you in case someone complains, what's the town planner doing?
Yeah. Makes sense.
And it's probably a relatively small universe of stuff anyway. So that was my comment. But otherwise, I like the efficiency, and I know that you did it. The precedent, that was the numbers you had used for Middletown, which is a little bit larger. But they aren't that big. So if we take those out, I was generally okay with it. So. But let's go around and see what people think about that. Joe Chadwick, I know you had some of those same, I was piggybacking on what you had done, but you had some of the same concerns. What are your thoughts on this one? Again, the minor site plan reviews and revisions.
I think the amendments you just discussed are fine. I had some misgivings about short circuiting the Town Center and Stony Creek. When I first initially thought about it, a matter so minor as to be taken up and handled administratively by the town planner shouldn't be of concern to them. But what if it was? And my rewrite of that, or my notes in that, were somewhat equivocal, and this removes that equivocation. If it's in their jurisdiction, it needs to go to them first, and I think that's great.
Great, thanks, Joe. And go to them and then come to us. So okay. Fred,
my opinion is that I think it's okay for staff to approve minor changes. But what I would add to that is this, that it doesn't, if staff is going to make a approval on something that's considered minor, I don't think it would be a reach to say you don't get it immediately because I've decided. That means it gives the planner a little more time to think about it. But in the interim, a notice would go out to the commissioners and say, hey, I'm going to make this change. Then each commissioner has a right to respond back to the planner and say, good, I'm okay with it, or I don't like it. Hey, did you consider this? So the commissioners are now still putting input into it, but the applicant doesn't have to wait 2 weeks to find out what the results are going to be if it had come before the commission. So I think it could be done, if we're going to give the planner that ability to approve minor changes. I still think it's important that if, in Joe's case, what he's saying is, hey, what if they do have an issue? Well, if they have an issue, we've covered that because the change was emailed out to all the commissioners. Each had an opportunity to put input to that change. And if it looks like there's a majority of commissioners who say, look, go for it, make the change, then the planner makes the change and it's done before it ever gets to the commission. So because I think Harry kind of implied that commissioners some way should be involved. But if we got to wait 2 weeks, then it doesn't make sense to allow the planner to make a change when he can't get it done unless we vote on it. But we could speed up the process by saying that one, the planner can make minor changes. Two, internally what happens is that he sends out an email to all the commissioners and say, hey, this is the change I'm going to make. We respond back to him. And I think to make it efficient all the way around, the applicant would know in, 24 hours that the change was made, or 48 hours. But it doesn't have to be done automatically. It's not done automatically when the way it is now. They got to wait 2 weeks to go through the commission again. So we can make it make it more efficient for the applicant, for the commission, for the planner if it was done that way. He's got the right to make minor changes. He informs the commissioners by email. We have 24 hours to respond. I mean, everybody has a phone today that they can respond immediately on. But let's say it's 24 hours, even 48 hours, and then it's not a long wait for the applicant, and it's not a long drag for staff either. That's what I would suggest.
So you're saying that the request comes in, McKeel would send it out, and if he doesn't hear anything within 2 days, then he has authority to do that.
To change it, yes.
To make the change.
Yes.
And would we need to put anything in the regulations to that effect, or would that just be the implementation policy that you don't necessarily have to put in the regs?
I would just say this. I think it can be done either way. I think that it's just procedural. What is the procedure that when a change is going to be made? The procedure is the planner sends out a notification to the commissioners. Commissioners have a certain length of time to say yes or no, or raise an issue, or approve it, or whatever, and then he does it. So it's still in his he's just using us as a consultants at that moment. And if there's a real issue there and a commissioner brings it up, then he has a right to say, look, I can't make this change. But it doesn't have to be brought before the commission and the general public, because it's a minor change, not the big stuff we're going to always hear. But the small stuff, I think we should get the last look, make a comment if we think it's worthwhile, and then he can get back to the applicant and say, yeah, in the 24, 48 hour period, it's approved and it's done. I think it makes it more efficient.
I mean, that it kind of puts us on, 24 hours. It means you better be checking your email and be a zoning, whatever.
Well, all I'm saying though, Chuck, is that, if we're going to allow the planner to make minor changes, and we're approving that, then there should be some responsibility on our part, if we want to oversee it, to be efficient too. You can't give the planner permission to make changes and then say, hey, I didn't get around it. I didn't check my email today. Well, shame on you. I mean, if we're going to prove him to do that, then he's got to be able to come back, put some responsibility on us and say, hey, I'm giving you an opportunity to comment on it. You got 48 hours to do it. You know, that doesn't seem unreasonable. And I think it's efficient for the planner, it's efficient for the commission, it's efficient for the applicant.
Right. I understand that. And that's one way to do it. I consider this to be making minor site plans the same thing as a zoning permit. Same thing as when you build a dwelling. You know, they don't come before us anyway. The planning staff and the zoning staff approves it if it conforms with the regulations. If it doesn't, they don't approve it. And this moves that into that category where we don't even look at it. Unless under this one, we will be notified because that they are now. I think that's what it is, and this would be. So anyway, that's how I looked at it. It's sort of broadened the scope of things that you just is done by the staff and doesn't need us. But I don't know. It is certainly different. I mean, and it is larger and it's new.
Yeah. I mean, Chuck, I don't know if you want, Sharon had this sort of sunset clause or a mandatory reauthorization. I didn't know if that is something we want to consider.
Okay. I mean, that's a way to try it out and to see. What would you do? Just add a sentence saying that
Yeah. I mean, I would like, because it is you're sort of vesting some power, I guess. But you know, to me, I view it as I'm just abiding by the regulations. But I'm wondering, you know, this was as a test, see how it goes. I don't want to make it too complicated. I have seen areas where there's been sort of like you try to do it as only if someone has a problem they'll raise it, but what happens is then people get upset that they didn't see it quick enough, and then they did have a problem with it and it wasn't timely, and then people want to rewrite the whole thing. So I want to sort of avoid that and not put the commission in that position. I just want to be upfront and clear that, yeah, this is a delegation of some authority, but also to projects that are, in my view, probably don't warrant a meeting at the commission level.
What was your experience in Middletown when you had this in place? Did you have people complaining after the fact? Hey, wait a minute, you should have told me.
Never.
Okay. Okay. But it doesn't mean, in the sunset provision, I just didn't know. Okay.
Like I think we're structuring around the organizational meeting, like every organizational meeting, this might be a housekeeping item. Do we reauthorize the town planner to do minor site plan reviews?
Okay. So we have a sunset provision on this. This shall expire. I don't know. We gotta. Yeah.
It's always the first meeting in December. So it's the organizational meeting. So you could do it that way.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, that's one way of addressing it. And then, but there's still the question: do you want to? Joe's suggestion is, you can't. You got to have a 48-hour and send it out. I'm just not committed. I'm not sure I want to check my email all the time.
And also, say if you object, I'm reviewing it based on the fact that I'm staking, my position that, okay, it meets the regulations.
Right.
I've reviewed it. I've met the regulations. There might be objections, but it's more with the regulation, not the proposal.
May I speak?
Yeah. We have.
Give it a beat.
I got through Joe and Fred, and I was gonna. Marcy, go ahead, and then we'll go get other comments.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but my sense is that most of the time these are minor site plan reviews because the major site plan review has already come in, and it's some, during construction, unforeseen this or that still complies. And my sense around these other commissions is if the town center review board or whoever looks at it and they have no issue, why do we then need to hear that they have no issue, why wouldn't, you know, we give Mikhail the, the latitude to interpret the, not even interpret, apply the regulations as they were written, and if there's an issue with that, then, you know, I imagine he's going to do what he's been doing this week, like this section we're finding here or that, and try to make revisions and ask our consideration of ways to improve the regulations so that they're more, cohesive across the town.
So you're okay with this?
So I'm in favor of giving Mikhail the authority to apply the regulations and to know the difference, and to, if the village district reviews something and has no issue, like these are sort of self-evident things. I don't disagree that we could do a sunset review, but I have no issue empowering him to apply the regs either. So.
Sure. Yeah. We've already taken out the village district stuff because that has, they need the downtown center, but the other ones, I think, you're okay with. So my understanding.
Yes, I'm okay with it.
Good. Joe Vayuzo, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm listening to Mikhail, what he's talking about. He's talking about going by the regulations, and it's a minor issue, and I really have no problem with that. I think what Fred is saying is it brings a good point, but if you do it that way, you would, if you're going to go that route, to me it would be only mandatory to respond if you have a conflict with it, but not necessarily being obligated to respond. If no response means an agreement to me. If it's only respond if you don't have an agreement to that situation, if you go down that route. But I'd rather it be the other way that we're talking, and just have Mikhail have full responsibility to do these minor situations, because it's based only on the regulations and nothing more than that. So I think that's the way we should go. We already talked about the town review board and Stony Creek and all that. That's all been omitted from exempt from this situation. So I think just have Mikhail go do the minor stuff would be fine with me, without the approval of an email. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Sharon, any thoughts?
No. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Okay, so the question is, do we want to adopt it? We've taken anything in the village district, in the downtown, in the Stony Creek Village District out of this. Do we want to? The two suggestions of possibly we're adding to it were that a sunset provision that that this shall expire in a year, just to do a trial, or Fred's suggestion is that, and I don't know if we need to put in the regs that Mikhail notify the commission members of the proposal and wait 48 hours or 2 days before approving anything to see if any commission members have any comments. So just do you, Fred, do you any further thoughts?
Well, I just feel that by having that last look, it's not really a point of questioning Mikhail whether he uses good judgment. I believe he does, and will always do that. But there may be a question on someone else's part. It might be the applicant. Hey, how come he gets to approve something that should go before the commission? I'm just saying what it does is it covers bases for this. He sent out a notification. If people did not respond, like Joe said, Joe Vayuza said, hey, they by default they accept the change. If someone does have a legitimate question about it, it's not that one commissioner is not going to shoot down the change. He's just going to question it one step further. So if there's ever a question, Mikhail can say, listen, I did pass it to the commission. We didn't make it as part of the commission meeting, but it was sent out to them. And you know, by default, those that didn't respond, they approved it. The one who raised an issue, it wasn't legitimate because he had good reasons to, to refute the concern, and it just goes on. I think it's not a big deal, but it's more protection for us as a commission that we're making sure we get last looks at everything, even on minor things, because in the end, the real question is what is minor? If someone's going to split hairs and say, that's really not minor, that's really major because of the implications. And that doesn't make Mikhail wrong. It's just going to make someone challenge what he does. He at least will have a fallback and say, it was sent out to the commissioners. I got either by default or by direct response that they're in favor or they're not in favor, or there's still some question. Because in the end, if Mikhail can't make that decision based on whatever reason, it's going to come to us anyway. So instead of waiting for it to come to us anyway, just send us an email. Those that respond, he knows their thoughts of it. Those that don't respond, will take it as in favor. And that's it. It's not a big deal, but I think it's another line of protection for the commissioner, the commission, the town planner, and the applicant as well. That's all.
Thanks, Fred.
If the applicant doesn't like the decision, they could always come to the commission anyway, can't they?
I think that was one of Harry's points. They can always request the commission. I don't know if it's clear in the regulations, but that I think was Harry Smith, is that the applicant should have the opportunity to make the application to the commission instead of the staff. I don't know if that is. I think that's a good point. I thought that was kind of implicit, but because it's in permissive language, but maybe we could say that in there, because the applicant has that opportunity.
Fred Russo, I just think that if and I don't expect there's going to be tons of them. There may not be any of them. Conflicts between the planners saying yes or no. The chances are, if we're going to hear from an applicant, it's going to be because the town planner said that the request to make the change is not a small change. It's more, it does. So that's going to be automatically brought to our attention. I just think that the decisions that he makes to make those that approve a certain change, it gets confirmed by even one commission member. It's better to have one commission member say, yeah, I thought it was a good idea, than the town planner making that decision and maybe being questioned later on. It just gives them a little bit more authority without having to bring it before the general public. That's all. But if whatever works. That's my feeling, though.
Nikhil, what do you think that is inefficient in the process? If you have to wait, if they submit it on a Monday, you couldn't just give them an answer till Wednesday.
I mean, if it's more of a policy practice, then I'm certainly willing to do that. Okay. I don't know about writing it into a regulation. And then, if someone says, well, I didn't receive it, or I didn't open my email this week, and now it's 47 to 72 hours later. It was no proper notice at that point. Negative.
Yeah. Are you okay just having it as a matter of policy and practice, not written in the reg?
Yes.
I'm good with that too.
Okay, good. Then why don't we do that? Just as a matter of implementation, we don't have to change the text, and you can send it out, and let's do it that way, and then we'll just revisit. In 6 months when we got all these emails, we'll figure if you still need to send it out for 48 hours or whatever. But do that as if you think that's okay. You just tell the public, yeah, now we can make minor, but it's gonna, it'll be 48 hours for you to get an answer.
Yeah, that's all.
But
they won't even know. I think they'll just
right.
They'll see that
it takes
it's been approved in less than 3 weeks or less than a month.
Right. Okay. We'll just do it have that as a matter of practice and see how it goes, and then go with that. Okay. So then you put in that the applicant has the opportunity to submit, and you have the opportunity, Nikhil, to say, wait a minute, I don't want to I don't want to decide this,
That's
you
correct.
can say, you can say, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's written in there too. So, okay. Okay, then I think we've got the text. Let's go through the resolution then. You want to go back to the beginning? Have I gone through everyone? I think I did. I think we got everyone's comments. Right. And then, okay, so you added a finding. And this is for those. And you're deleting.
It's essentially the existing paragraph and replacing it with.
Yeah, that. Right. Okay. Yep, that's as we discussed, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
And then we're adopting the.
So we have minor modifications under this section, and this is building a new section 9.6K.
And that simply amplifies and describes more particularly what constitutes that, right?
Correct. So this is all the same language, it's just in a different location now.
Right.
And this is the inventory of what really does constitute a minor change.
Right.
Of an improved plan.
Okay.
And then there'll be a new 9.6L, and this is the minor site plan reviews.
Right.
Where we just went through.
Right.
Mechanics and what is the qualifies.
Right. And then we took out anything in the downtown and the Stony Creek Village districts. Right. And then you're going to have, as a matter of policy, you would notify us, you wouldn't act within 48 hours after notifying us, send to the commission in case any commission wanted to raise any issues.
Correct.
But we don't, yeah. Okay. Okay, then. Do we have that? We need to make a finding of consistency with the plan of conservation development, and that it is also in accordance with the comprehensive plan and an effective date. I don't know if that's in there somewhere.
No.
Okay. The effective date has to be after the publication.
Yeah.
So you have to publish note. Yeah.
I'm just gonna keep it simple.
Okay. So that the notice will be published sometime this month. So,
yep.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, then. Does someone want to make a motion then to approve these, the adoption of these text amendments with the finding again of consistency with the plan of the consistency with the plan of conservation development, and also that it is in accordance with the comprehensive plan of zoning in the town with an effective date of December 1st.
Fred Russo will make that motion.
Motion by Fred to approve the amendments with those findings and effective date. Is there a second?
Chadwick will second.
Second, Joe Chadwick. Any further discussion? All those in favor, Joe Chadwick?
Joe Chadwick is in favor.
Fred Russo?
Fred Russo is in favor.
Joe Vayuso? Joe?
Lose him.
Do we lose Joe?
No, he's there. He's trying to unmute, but I think you have to unmute again. There you are.
Joe Vayuso in favor.
Thanks, Joe. Marcy?
Marcy's in favor.
And the chair is also in favor. Okay. Thank you, McKeel.
Oh, thank you.
Take that off the screen. Now, turning to old business, we've got a coastal site plan that I think you're still waiting for additional information
Correct.
about. So we can pass on that one, Dan, right? Okay.
Yes, it's on hold at the moment.
Okay, that's number one of old business. And then number two, we had a request for a time extension for the Mylar for 1937 Gould Lane. What's that about? Just
So this is the pre-lot subdivision off of Gould Lane, also off of Beach Road. There was a significant conservation easement that's being established on many of the properties. And it's in favor of the Branford Land Trust. The developer and the Branford Land Trust are very close to being done on the deeds, but they need a little bit more time, so they've requested a 90-day extension in order to do so. But they're probably days and weeks away to actually filing, but they are over the deadline.
Thanks, Mikhail. Anyone have any questions? Not someone make a motion to approve the 90-day time extension to file the Mylar for 1937 Gould Lane subdivision.
Chadwick makes that motion.
Motion by Joe Chadwick. Is there a second?
Marcy,
second.
Give it to Marcy. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Joe Chadwick?
Joe Chadwick is in favor.
Fred Russo?
Fred Russo is in favor.
Joe Vayuso?
Joe Vayuso in favor.
Marcy?
Marcy's in favor.
And Chair's also in favor. New business. I don't see anything. It's always good.
No, but you'll see the GS 8-24 reviews. I don't know if you want to take those up now.
Yeah, they're under other business, but why don't we take them up now? Go ahead. We have two 824 referrals. First one is for looks 3 properties: 138 Chestnut Street, 0 Brushy Plain Road, and 0 Plessy Plain Road. You want to?
Yeah, really quickly. I do see First Selectman Jamie Cosgrove on the line as well, but I put together some information on what this pertains to. There's 2 acquisitions being considered by the town of Branford. The first is 3 lots that total 11.4 acres. It's proposed for open space. It's off of between Chestnut Street and Brushy Plain Road. I have it in blue outline, so it's a small triangle near the highway, and then it's 2 sort of interior lots that all abut significant open space around the supply ponds. And I've just put how it complies with the plan of conservation and development, and specifically as a greenway system that calls out the supply ponds. So I think this is pretty clear that it's consistent. I'll do the other one next, but I didn't know if First Selectman Cosgrove wanted to comment on this particular acquisition.
Thank you, Mikhail. I think you covered it. I think you covered how it's aligned with our plan of conservation development. I'm just happy to answer any questions if the commission has any questions, given the hour of the night.
Thank you, McKeel and Mr. Cosgrove. Does any commission member have any question about this? This again, it's an 824 referral. This is part of our authority as a planning commission. We make when the town does big things like acquires land, we have these PLCDs that we do every 10 years. In the PLCD, we have a whole thing about open space. It was a big thing that public usually is in favor of. I think it got a lot of cheerleading for it. This land looks to be contiguous to existing open space, which is where you want the open space. Talk about saving native trees. That's probably a good way to do it. It seems to fit the criteria, but I don't know if anyone has any questions about this. If not, then does someone want to make?
Sharon Putner here. Well done. Thank you, Mr. Cosgrove.
Okay. Thank you, Sharon. If not, someone will make a motion to offer a positive 824 referral with respect to the town's proposed acquisition of three properties.
Fred Russo will make that motion.
Motion by Fred. Is there a second?
Marcy will second.
Second by Marcy. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Joe Chadwick?
Joe Chadwick is in favor.
Fred Russo?
Fred Russo is in favor.
Joe Vayuso?
Joe Vayuso in favor.
Marcy?
In favor.
And the chair is also in favor. And then we have a second 824 referral for 5.2 acres on 15 and 21 East Industrial Road for the town of Branford for municipal facilities, public works, and fire.
Yeah. So, yeah, this is an acquisition of IG2 property. It's two parcels under common ownership. And, you know, it's been in the plan of conservation development that there needs to be a new public works facility. I'm assuming this is to fulfill that sort of strategy or recommendation in the plan of conservation and development. And the other is that this site will also potentially accommodate a firehouse down the road. We do have a recommendation that the long-term functionality of outlying fire stations and adequacy needs to be evaluated in turn. I think those have been evaluated, and now we have we found a better option in order to be able to serve people with fire, public safety on that side of Branford. It is fairly close by to the existing facility, which I believe is leased. And then I pointed out where the new facility is being located right off of exit 56, which is good access to provide, not just public works facilities, but then that service all the functions that it serves throughout the town of Branford. And I'll turn it over to First Selectman Cosgrove.
Yeah, once again, happy to answer any questions, specific questions regarding this acquisition. We do feel that the facility itself, the adjoining parcel, meets a number of the town's current needs and future needs, both in DPW, fire, as well as some other space needs that we have in town hall. That we feel that this facility would accommodate that. Once again, happy to answer any specific questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Cosgrove. Any questions from anyone? Okay. Well, I think I think Nikhil explained the consistency with the plan of conservation development. I know that we've had temporary public works locations for a while, and the fire needs and the immediate access to the highway. You can get to other parts of town pretty quickly, so looks like a good fit.
I do have a question.
Sure, absolutely, Marcy.
Do we know any data on how many of the fire calls actually happen along 95?
I do not have that specific information. I know the fire chief, the fire department recently completed a strategic facility and staffing plan, which clearly it really has to do with time response, both with fire and EMS calls, and trying to meet that 4-minute target. That's really the goal that ICO looks to have. Also, keep in mind, we have mutual aid agreements with North Branford and Guilford, which, given its not only proximity to 95, but which access to Leeds Island Road, Route 1, and 139. This will help us, ensure that we're providing that mutual aid in adequate time as well. On the fire side.
Thank you, Mr. Cosgrove. Thank you, Marcy. Any other questions from commission members? If not, then does someone make a motion for a positive 824 referral with respect to the town acquisition of this property at 15 and 21 East Industrial Road?
Marcy will make that motion as presented.
Motion for the positive referral made by Marcy. Is there a second?
Chadwick seconds.
Second, Joe Chadwick. Any further discussion? All those in favor, Joe Chadwick.
Joe Chadwick is in favor.
Fred Russo.
Fred Russo is in favor.
Joe Vayuzo.
Joe Vayuzo in favor.
Marcy.
Marcy's in favor.
Chuck, I'm also in favor. Sharon, I guess. Sorry. Okay, yeah, so that's unanimous positive 820 referrals for both acquisitions. Thank you, Mr. Cosgrove. Now we got to go back and we covered that under new business, but we got to go back and approve some minutes, I think, for the October 23rd, 2025 meeting. I know they were sent out with our packet. I don't know if anyone has had a chance to review those. And if so, does someone want to make a motion to approve the minutes for the October 23, 2025 meetings?
Fred Russo will make that motion.
Motion approved by Fred. Is there a second? Somebody?
Joe
Second.
Vayuso, second.
Second by Joe Vayuso. Any further discussion? All in favor? Joe Chadwick?
Joe Chadwick is in favor.
Fred Russo?
Fred Russo's in favor.
Joe Vayuso?
Joe Vayuso in favor.
Marcy Paluzzi?
Marcy's in favor.
And Chair's also in favor. So minutes are approved. Any correspondence, Nikhil?
There's no correspondence.
Okay.
No letters.
Other business, approval of the 2026 meeting dates.
So we have a draft set of meeting dates that was sent out. I believe it was sent out to everyone. There is a list here. Part of it is I want to just, for conversation, we can approve this at the next meeting. I did want to go through, there's a couple things I want to suggest. And the first is that in April, July, and December, we maybe might do one meeting, mostly because April, there's the 9th is the end of a Jewish holiday. And then same with July, it's a couple days before July 4th. And I would say that we would want to maybe, try and shoot for one meeting in July and maybe have a special if there was really a need to hold that another meeting. But those are ideas I have based on what I'm seeing on the calendar.
Okay.
I don't know if there was thought.
And the meetings that we're having the 2nd April, I think we moved out. It's the 2nd and 4th. It's because of Jewish holidays, I think. Was that the
Correct?
And that was a possible conflict with wetlands meeting on the same night, or is there some issue with that?
If we move our Thursday meetings, then we conflict with wetlands, and then you'll get certain applicants who are frequent flyers. They have to go to both meetings at the same time, and then you have BCTV who can't show both meetings at the same time. Trying to sort of avoid that scenario.
Okay, but we're still suggesting doing that because that's the best way to do it, you think?
Yeah, but probably limit it to one meeting rather than try and double book two meetings in each of those months.
Okay, do you suggest we decide that now, or do you want to wait till the next meeting?
We have time to wait till the next meeting, so
okay.
Do you guys have real strong opinions and we can make a decision right now, or?
No, there's a very good possibility I'm not going to make the next meeting, by the way, because I have something else. But I can live with whatever you decide. It's not an issue.
Okay.
Fewer meetings are better.
Fewer meetings.
Yeah, because we made the planner decide all the site plans.
There you go. Yes,
that's right.
Well, we have a history of long meetings and extra meetings in the summer, which if we can avoid that, great.
I would love it. I don't know what's down the pike. You never know. It hasn't been that bad recently, but you never know. So, okay. So those we'll finalize that at the next meeting. Planners report.
Only one thing I want to touch on is OpenGov. We have that up and running. We put the links on the agenda. I don't know if you had a chance to go in and use that yet. I will be sending out a cheat sheet to help you guide you on what to do in OpenGov. You don't need to create an account if you don't want to. You should be able to access the application records by clicking on the link in the agenda. But I wanted to make sure that it is working for you guys if you had questions, but I am trying to get you a cheat sheet to help support you in that.
Thank you.
That's great. Be good to be able to pull up the plans and look at them and everything else.
Sharon Putner, I clicked on the sites on the agenda for today and they work perfectly well.
Okay, that's good to know.
That was great. Yeah.
Excellent. The other thing I know that's coming up is, I think under our bylaws, we have to vote for officers at the December meeting. Is that what it is?
Correct.
Okay. And traditionally, we've had an alternate canvass regular members to see if there's any interest. Sharon, you're the lucky person that's, I think, done that in the past.
Yes,
You're
right.
willing to continue to do that. So
Yes, that would be my pleasure.
great. And again, that would not be at the next meeting, but the first December meeting. So you have a
Okay.
little time.
Put it in my calendar.
Great. Anything else?
That is it.
Okay. Then I guess a motion to adjourn is in order.
Fred Russo will make that motion.
Motion to adjourn made by Fred. Is there a second?
Chadwick seconds.
Second, Joe Chadwick. All in favor of the motion to adjourn? Joe Chadwick.
Joe Chadwick is in favor.
Fred Russo.
Fred Russo's in favor.
Joe Vayuzo.
Joe Vayuso in favor.
Marcy.
In favor.
And Chair is also in favor. So good. We're adjourned. Good night, everyone.
Have a great night, everybody.
Good night,
everybody.
Bye.
Go outside and
Bye.
see if you can find the midnight lights are supposed to, northern lights. Are
Oh,
supposed
really?
to be available tonight, but you have to stay up till 1 p.m., 1 a.m.
It's
can
almost
tell me
1
all
p.m.
about it.
But
It's
it's
almost
only a
1
couple
p.m. now.
hours.
This program was brought to you in part through the support of the Town of Branford. Watch town meetings and other videos on demand at BranfordTV.org.